Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disorganized Play. I am your host. Am I anything else? I guess I'm maybe your co-host today. I'm Tom Lommel, acclaimed dungeon master. I've bestowed that title upon myself. I
would agree with that.
You are under no obligation to laud me with acclaims. And joining me today, Jen Kretchmer is here. We are here to talk about tips and advice for being a first-time GM or a beginner GM who's just thinking about starting their own game. Maybe you've played a little bit. Maybe what you've played kind of hasn't wet your whistle, hasn't appealed to you in a way that you like. Maybe you're not getting along with the group that you started playing with and you want to start your own thing. All of those are kind of the realm of possibility, but that's sort of the framework for
Maybe
what we're
you need more Dungeons and Dragons in your life.
I mean, I was gonna say, can you ever have too much Dungeons and Dragons in your life? But one of the cast members in the Iron Keep Chronicles, which is the D&D show that I run, he plays like 6 days a week, and I'm like, that's too much Dungeons and Dragons in your life.
4, I think.
Yep.
5?
Yep. I've been there. I gladly embarked upon that journey, and then I got married, and it was like it's time to put some balance in my life and carve out some different time for different things to indulge myself in. So yes, so that's our topic for today. You can see there's a couple things on the side here. We're going to talk about kind of what are some tips and tricks and advice from our own bag of DM experience here that we can.
Bag of holding.
Yeah, our portable hole of experience. You have a bag of holding of experience. I just have a portable hole. I stare into it, and then the abyss stares back. So that's what we're going to be sharing today. We're going to talk about a couple things. First, we're going to start off talking about mastering sort of the play of the game. So the rules, the table, the adventure, those are sort of the three main components as I see them as your job as the GM. So what is the job of the GM and what's the best way to go about it and prepare yourself for it and to actually do it. And then secondly, we're going to talk about what you need, what you don't need to be a starter DM. I think we talked a little bit before the show. We're both sort of the opinion you don't necessarily need a lot of stuff.
Not much.
Yeah, D&D is a game of stuff, but primarily it's a game of imagination that has stuff fill in the cracks, right? So, so before we get too far down the road, we got a lot of things to talk about today. We'll take some Q&A at the end of our time here, or at the end of when we're done talking. I'm never done talking. Spoiler alert, I'm never done talking, but I'm going to try and rein myself in.
Post-lecture.
Yes, post-lecture.
We'll have a seminar.
I need to put on my British professor voice. So before we get to your questions, I want to get to your questions and get to the bulk of our lecture today. Jen, why don't you just give everyone a little idea of like what your experience is, where you're coming from with your gaming career and your philosophy and what you're up to.
So I have been playing D&D for about 17 years. I've been DMing for 15. I am a professional DM, as on top of my regular other job, which is I produce TV. So I storytell basically full time. I have been on a number of different streamed shows and games. I did Maze Arcana. I love D&D. I love the community. I am philosophically all about inclusion in D&D and accessibility in D&D. Particularly for disabled gamers, because I feel like that's a very underserved population in tabletop gaming. But I really love the game, and I love introducing people who are new to the game to the world of D&D and the possibilities of being able to create a game, because I firmly am of the opinion that there is a game out there for everybody.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also a fan of all of those things. But yeah, I definitely believe specifically in inclusion and accessibility and that sort of stuff. I feel like I come to the table more as maybe a old school kind of advanced Dungeons and Dragons was sort of where I cut my teeth. Yeah. So I've been playing since I was 14, and I've been to Gen Con a bunch, and I was very involved with in third edition, Monty Cook had his own forums. He had a company called Malhovic Press, and I was very involved with the Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil forums because I was running that adventure. I just fell in love with that adventure.
It's a great adventure.
And I think part of like how that informs why I'm even involved in this whole thing today is we had a community of DMs there, right? It was a DMs only forum, and we would get together and we would rehash the module and we'd give people advice on like, well, this part's going to be kind of tough, and this part, you know, your players might not pick up on the clues, and people would come into the forums and say, you know what, my party absolutely wasted this guy. How can I really challenge him? And likewise, how can I shortcut the plot because we've got to like wrap things up in 3 months?
Right.
And it was really eye-opening to me to see the power of a community of DMs helping each other, and not necessarily like helping each other to like screw the players, but helping each other to give the best advice and create the best experience for that particular table on that party. And so
that still exists. I mean, Reddit has a ton of different subforums, and actually that is not a really horrific place to be on Reddit.
I haven't been.
Yeah, they have Behind the Screen. They have, I mean, there's a DM advice for a couple of DM advice forums, D&D Next, D&D 5e, RPG, you know, all of these subs are really supportive and have all sorts of incredible tools and different ways people have run adventures, things they've implemented, crafts they make to bring into their game. I mean, it is a valuable resource, I've found.
It's funny because I'm honestly like I've been scared off of Reddit, but I spend a lot of time on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So which is almost
As do I.
the flip side, because the great thing about a forum post is you can really get in depth and you can get like lengthy replies that really have a lot of context to them. And then Twitter is like the exact opposite, where it's just quick hit, wham, 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 you know, and the topics change, and like every week it's 3 different things. So that's kind of like where I live now, and then just kind of like put a bow on why even this show exists is every Wednesday I run a D&D game here on Saving Throw, and so the purpose really of this show is to normally during our regular week, we're dark this week, so we get to do a special episode. Normally what I do is talk about, okay, these are the issues that I see that are coming up in the game. These are some things that I observed from last session that I want to make sure I adjust for or keep in mind or whatever. So I definitely believe in sharing like philosophy and trying to get everybody the best experience that they can.
Yeah, well, and the more collaborative, I mean, like a regular game, the more collaborative you are in terms of sharing knowledge amongst people who have played. I mean, combined, you're looking at millions and millions of hours of DM experience. Yeah. And those resources are invaluable.
And I think the topper, just to kind of cap off the introduction here, is that we both come at this from different perspectives. And wherever you get your advice, whether it's from watching a streaming show or watching somebody on YouTube or reading Reddit or reading Twitter or whatever it is, like, find what resonates for you. Like, as long as everybody at your table is having fun, including you, then you're doing it right.
Exactly.
There's no right
There's
way
no right
to
or wrong
play
in terms of
D&D.
I mean, even the game designers have said that. They've said, first of all, what the DM says goes.
Right.
And secondly, they've said there is no right way to run a game. It's whatever your table wants to do. If that means disregarding the rules for story or just for fun or simplifying them or changing them, it's your table. And you and your players should make those decisions and find the best game for yourself.
So that sort of like that segues nicely into our first. So we're going to talk about what you, as a beginner DM, what do you need to do to master the game? Now, I think that term, like we throw that term around dungeon master, right? But it doesn't matter how many, whether you've been playing 17 years or
encyclopedic knowledge of the rules. It doesn't mean you have to know what page every spell is on or what the casting time is or what the components are. You don't have to know that as a DM.
I think that the term itself is a little bit. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, right? You need to take it that way, because if you really strive to master the rules, you're sort of following a false goal. I don't feel like I'm the ultimate master of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I see a DM as essentially on the same tier as the players. It's not, people think of DMs as these elevated positions. They're not. As a DM, my job is to make sure my players are having a satisfying experience, and that means, adjusting constantly and being flexible for what they're wanting from the game.
Right.
As long as I'm still having fun. If you are not having fun for the sake of your players having fun all the time, then something's off. But to me, the core of D&D is you should always be worrying about whether the person next to you is having a good time, because that way everybody has a good time. Help your players or your DM achieve whatever they're trying to achieve, and you'll get a great story.
It's that kind of perspective that is important, because the way the game is set up is, as the DM, you do have like the ultimate say-so over what happens. You can literally just say, no, you don't do that, or rocks fall from the sky and
rocks fall, everyone dies,
or whatever, right? So you do have ultimate authority over the story that's being creative.
Yeah.
But I think you come to realize as you play that it's your use of that authority in service to the players and in service to the experience that that really matters, right? That's how you apply. It's how you apply that power that's important. It's not that you have that power. Yeah.
I mean, the ultimate power is not needing to wield it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah, and knowing when to wield it.
Yeah,
right?
And I think, I got into a kind of a your fun is wrong discussion. Someone came, I recapped, I've been running Lost Minds of Phandelver for one of my groups, and they just came up against the final battle. And I had adjusted the battle. It was not as written. I had added a whole bunch more things to make it more complicated. Yeah, it's in here. It's a really great adventure. It's a wonderful adventure. But they were facing off against a really brutal situation, and they had been poisoned by something right before they walked in.
Right.
There was an enemy amongst them. It was great. It was really good. You guys should think about using antitoxin from an ally. Right before the final battle of this. It goes well. So I was recapping how this all went, and my players were close to a wipe, and my cleric wanted to cast Prayer of Healing. Prayer of Healing has a 10-minute cast time. I let it go off.
Right.
Because it turned the tide and it let them get out. There were consequences for other things that happened, and they did not get all of the enemies. Some of the enemies escaped, so there's conflict coming up down the line. But somebody came online and was like, "Well, that's wrong. You have broken the rules of the game."
Can't do that.
I was like, "I'm playing with a group of newer players on that game.
Right.
They want to feel cool. Yeah. It's DM prerogative to tweak it.
Yeah.
So the rules in that case, had I gone by the rules, everyone would have died and they would have not been happy about it." So. And
I think so. Our subtopic here at this point, the first thing on the list anyhow, is the rules.
Yeah.
And I would argue you need to be familiar with how attacks and damage work, how skills work, and saving throws, and that's about it. Like, as long as you know how those three things work, the intricacies of a spell, not so important. The exact way that somebody's feat or racial ability works, you can kind of negotiate that at the table, right?
Yeah, well, and also your players get to do some of the lifting. As the DM, you are not responsible for learning however many thousands of pages of material is out there. That is not what you have to do. Your job is to facilitate the game, to narrate what's happening, and to help them on their journey, and award XP or milestone or however you're going to do your leveling up. But your job is not to be the encyclopedia of being able to regurgitate rules. It's about, your players do have some responsibility as a DM to know what their characters can do, and you can say, hey, is that a ranged spell attack, or is that a save? How does that work?
It's perfectly okay. I really want to encourage you to go, oh, okay, well, wait a minute, how does that work? To ask that question. You don't have to feel like you're somehow letting your table down by not knowing every single rule. As a DM, your job is not to know the rules. Your job is to make rulings, right? And make them in the interest of what seems fair to everyone at the table and what seems most fun, right? And
also what serves the story.
Right. So it may be the case where you have to take a 2-minute time out and go, well, okay, well, tell me how that spell works, and then you get through it, and then you get to the other side of it. What you don't necessarily want to do is take a 30-minute timeout where you have a big argument back and forth. You know, that's where you get to use your power to make rulings to go, okay, I tell you what, we're going to make this a dexterity check. It's a DC 14. Roll the dice, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, if you get stuck in one of those, the best thing to say is we're going to do this right now, and then out of game, we will go look at that before next session. We'll clarify, and we'll agree on a ruling for future uses.
Yeah.
So that's a smooth way to do it and not get into it with players. You know, if it's a life or death kind of thing, then that may be a conversation that you have to say, okay, guys, we're going to take a break now. Go run to the bathroom, grab some snacks. We'll come back in 10. Let me just do my homework on this so that we know that we're all on the up and up. So.
And likewise, I think it's okay after the session's over to check in with your players and go, hey, I just made a quick kind of off the top of my head ruling on this. Is this cool with everyone, how this works? I think there might, you can always talk with your players about it and or go back and revise your ruling and say, I know I did it that way that time, but I think it's more fair in the future if we do this.
Yeah.
But I think the main takeaway is, there's a lot of books.
It's a lot of material.
And there's a lot of material. And you may, it is not a prerequisite to read it all and understand it all before you start playing.
Though I do advise if you are running an adventure, read it through all the way at least once so that you know where you're headed and you can start dropping things in. And then review the specific area where your players are before the session starts so you know roughly where they could be going. I'm a prep nerd. I do way too much prep for my games. I'm willing to let it all go if they go the other way, which 90% of the time your players will do. That's the other thing.
Right.
Is you're going to prepare and prepare and prepare no matter what you do. Your player, no plan survives contact with your players. They will, you say, do you want to, you're expecting them to go A, B, or C, and they go, I'm going to go to 47, and you're going, that wasn't even, wait, what?
There's no numbers on here. It's all letters.
And then you go, okay, and now we're in 47, whatever that may be. So you prepare so you don't have, it's the improvisation thing. It's you prepare so you can let it all go and just get into it and ride the ride.
Know enough that you're comfortable to be able to address the situations that are in front of you and also address what might pop up unexpectedly.
Right.
And you can't prepare for every circumstance, but if you know how attack rolls work, how skill checks work, and how saving throws work, you can address 95% of the things in the game with an impromptu ruling.
Absolutely.
It's really that simple. So I know that we love to kind of like spout the arcana of like, oh well, there's this 4th level spell, and when you combine it with something that the cleric casts, and then you use this ability, it does the like exponential amounts of damage or whatever. Like those are fun little nooks and crannies to find in the rules. It is not the game.
It is not the game. And the min-max thing, I think so often you'll run into people where that is their fun, is finding the most optimized thing, and then they always end up landing on like Great Weapons Master or Crossbow Expert with Sharpshooter. Like, you always come back to the same couple of things. So I think reminding players that it's not all about the numbers, that so much of the game is about the role play. That's why it's a role-playing game, not a numerical game.
And I think that brings us very cleanly to our next topic, which is running the table, right? And so what that really means is engaging your players and also engaging them in the game itself, the flow of the game. In my mind, when I put that bullet point on the screen, like that's what mastering the table is about. And so part of that is being able to respond to what your players are going to do. Part of that, like you were just saying, is knowing kind of what their play styles are like. Okay, well, Jordan really likes to play, like he likes combat, he likes doing tons of damage, he loves rolling dice. He doesn't care about puzzles, he doesn't really engage in the role playing. So let's just keep that in mind. Like the interesting thing about Dungeons and Dragons is that everybody has their own different version of fun that they're indulging, and the game can serve all of those people at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you might have a person who is big into like role playing and they want to do some outrageous voice and they maybe dress up or they have a prop or something like that. And combat is kind of boring for them. It doesn't really get that. You might have somebody who's really involved in the story, like, okay, I want to figure out what's going on and what the mysteries and the puzzles and all that sort of stuff are. You might have somebody who's a combat monster. Acknowledge that, like, figure out like what kind of checks off the box, where they light up. And then give them time so that you can kind of shine the spotlight on them.
Yeah, and some cues you can look for are those players will lean in when they're engaged. Like, they will physically actually lean in. They'll get much more animated as they're talking about what they're doing. If you have someone who's really into numbers as a combat, nut, you'll see them doing a lot of stuff on their paper. You can look into the DM's guide has, it also might be in the player's handbook, but the archetypes of players, where they talk about having the actor and having the
DM's guide.
I think it's a DM's guide thing, but there's a breakdown of the different types of players that you generally run into. I think something you can also look at.
It's on page 6. It's one of the first
it's really
things.
early.
Right? And they talk about whether you're an actor, an explorer, an instigator, a fighter, an optimizer, a problem solver, or a storyteller.
Yep. And I think the other thing that people can think about when they're meeting their players and getting to know them is whether they're a visual kinesthetic or auditory learner.
What do you mean by kinesthetic?
Kinesthetic is someone who needs to do to learn. So it's a physical. So it's either you have visual awareness, you learn best by listening to something, or you learn best by physically doing something.
Okay.
And you'll notice that people talk about what they do in terms that relate to, I hear this, you hear me say that, or I see this thing. You'll watch your players use that kind of language. And once you know what kind of player you are, you can tailor their play style more that way. So a visual player is really going to love maps and minis. That's something that's really helpful. And kinesthetic sometimes does as well. Kinesthetic players, though, are much more likely to, like, get up out of their chair and act stuff out and move around. But so if you have a visual player, bring in props, bring in maps and minis. If you have an auditory player, it's all about description and articulating sensory experiences and what you see and what you smell and just talking through it so they can hear it and process it that way.
Right.
Kinesthetic player, they're going to love physical props. They're going to love, that's probably who's going to paint their minis.
Right.
And that's going to be the person that really gets up and physically into it and embodies their character a lot of the time. So listening for those subtle cues will help steer what your DM style should be for that group too.
And you may not necessarily feel equipped to like accommodate all of those things at once, and that's okay to like kind of take baby steps into it, right? Like if you are not somebody who writes up tons of descriptions and NPC traits and stuff like that, that's all right. Like, just do what you can to make your game the most engaging for everyone.
Yep.
I feel like when we start layering on a bunch of props and things like that, like, I know for me, I love props, but then that also eats the most of my prep time, and the session ends up like I feel put on the spot for other parts of the session because I spent 4 hours making this awesome map that I'm gonna put on the table and everybody's gonna look at and go, okay, we go over here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh no, I don't know what happens over there.
That's right. I love to lay stuff in. Whenever I give out physical props, I love to lay stuff in. One of my groups, I've been doing invisible ink on their physical props since the beginning of the campaign, and they just met a planeswalker who's the first person that got the black light and goes, oh, and now all of a sudden they're pulling everything out and they're getting very excited because they have a new puzzle to solve. So
I think, finding the ways that your players engage in discussion at the table is important. Finding the types of players that they are. Sometimes the table will get away from you where there'll be a lot of crosstalk and a lot of chatter. I'm going to tell you like a very simple trick, which I don't recommend you lean on a lot, but if your table really gets away from you, you can ask them to roll for initiative, right? It's a really great way that uses the game mechanics that everybody's familiar with to get everybody to like fall in line and actually take turns speaking and stop talking over each other, stop interrupting each other, stop having side conversations that aren't related. Like, it gets everybody focused back on what's happening. Whether you're having a combat or not, you can just say, okay, roll for initiative. You know, it's kind of a DM escape hatch that's there for you if you
The
need
talking
it.
stick.
Yeah, right. I think also it is important to recognize not just what different play styles are, but different personality styles, right? You may have somebody at your table who's really big and has an idea and they want to go for it, but they end up steamrolling half the other table. Like these people don't ever get to chime in, and they want to say something, but they're too polite to.
And that's when, as a DM, you need to say, hold that thought. So and so wanted to say something, or hey, what's your character doing right now?
Right.
You know.
So give them a chance, not just for their character's abilities to shine, but give them a chance to chime in with their own ideas. Right. I always liken this experience to like I compare being a DM to being the host of a dinner party, right? And so before everybody shows up, I cook up all of these fabulous dishes, and then everybody comes to my house and they sits down at the table and I start serving. Okay, here's the appetizer, and they all take turns politely, sipping their drinks and sampling some of the stuff, and take turns in the conversation. And then the next course comes out. Now, I may change what it is if I find out, like, oh, okay, they're really into roast beef today and not so much into the chicken or whatever, right? But it is a matter of, I have prepared the table for you. I'm going to host a great experience for you to the best of my ability. But the other part of that social contract is, if you're invited to a dinner party, you don't show up with mud on your feet and throw your glass against the wall and shout down whoever's talking at the front of the table or whatever. No, you take turns and you be a good guest. And that's really, I mean, it's a fairly pedestrian metaphor, but I think it really does create a relatable kind of framework for here's what's going on. We're all in this together.
I think of it as a jazz trio or a jazz quintet.
Most people have been to a dinner.
People listen to jazz, but there's it's theme and variations and giving everyone a chance to improvise and then harmonizing and weaving it in dynamically and. So for me, I think that's kind of where I've landed. But dinner party totally makes sense too, and I would absolutely agree with that. I might even take it a step further and say it's a potluck.
It is a potluck. It really is a potluck. What did you bring to the table? Yeah, and what do you have to share? And in some ways, it's also actually, it's more like you're all cooking the meal together, right? Like, let's all get in the kitchen and what are we going to have
What's
next?
Your skill
that was
set?
amazing.
What do you know how to cook?
What are we going to have for dessert?
Yeah.
That's really sort of maybe a little more apt way of how everybody interacts to make the experience great.
I think we very often have gotten into, this goes back to the kind of canonizing the GM.
Yes.
But I think we've gotten away from the idea a lot of the time that tabletop games are collaborative. And I think there are ways to kind of bring yourself back into that, but allowing your players to take some of the narrative weight is a big way to do it.
Right.
Hey, where did you get that dagger? I don't have to give you the backstory for where you got your dagger.
Right.
Tell me where you found it. Who gave it to you? Why did they do that? What does it look like?
How do you know the priest at the local temple? So, and I think I think. Honestly, I'm gonna disagree a little bit here. I feel like we're getting more toward a narrative model for D&D because, from my perspective, it started as a very adversarial model where the DM has all of these secrets behind their DM screen, and then we're just gonna throw bombs at the party and see if they can catch them or lob them in a different direction, right? And that was, the two-second history lesson here is that Dungeons and Dragons comes out of a tradition of wargaming where it literally was everybody fighting at the table trying to defeat everybody else, and then it turned into they're a party and I'm the DM, so it's everybody on this side of the screen versus the guy over here. And that's a fun style of play for. If that's your gig, if that's the way that you want to play the game, and as long as everybody knows, like the DM is not rigging things, I'm going to give you I'm going to be tough, but you're going to have a fair shot at defeating this. But I think it's much more interesting now to see people realize that it's not a mechanical exercise in me and my 3 trolls and my 15 goblins against the 4 of you and your
I saw somebody tweeted, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but there was a great tweet earlier in the week about DMing is is making your players terrified of the enemies you're going to throw at them and then stacking the deck in their favor.
I think the tricky thing about that is if the players know that you're stacking the deck in their favor.
Oh, no. You don't tell them you're stacking.
Yeah.
They
Right.
can't know that. But DMing
Right.
is always, I think you root for your heroes.
Yeah, I think
Most of the time.
I think really the elemental experience of being a DM is your job is to reveal more information and to create consequences, right? That's to me like regardless of whether it's you create a challenge and then they overcome it and they get a reward, right? And sometimes we think of that reward as they defeat a monster and then they get XP or they get treasure or they get renown or whatever the case may be. But most of the time, I think what's really refreshing and needs to be considered is they get more information about what's going on.
Absolutely.
And that's, to me, that's the challenge part of it is interesting on a base level, but the process of revealing that information is really what takes you from being a DM who kind of sets things out there and then just lets it kind of run, and versus being a DM who is able to see like, oh, actually that guy recognizes you, or he decides to this NPC decides to surrender. He's seen enough,
Yeah, I think it's yes and, but not only yes and, it's also yes and therefore, which is an improv technique of you take whatever the person is giving you, you figure out a way to say yes.
Right.
So sometimes it's a very conditional yes.
Right.
And then you say, and then this happens because of what you did. So you expand on what they've put out there.
Right.
And I think improv is a really great resource for DMs. I think I may be the first person in history to go to an improv class and say, they ask why you're here. And I'm like, because I want to improve my dungeon mastering skills.
I literally have a whole hour-long episode on disorganized play about improv DMing. I would counter that a more valuable tool. You can definitely agree with your players when it seems like the challenge isn't interesting. I look around. Is there a tree I can climb? Don't make them roll for yes, of course there's a tree you can climb. But if what they're asking for seems implausible, then it's okay to say no, but, and then give them a different course of action that they. Absolutely. And to me, no, but is a little bit more interesting technique than yes, and you can do everything. I like yes, therefore.
I'm all about no, but as long as it's not to shut them down.
Right.
As long as you're going off, because in a way then you're still yes-anding. You're
exactly.
Listening to what they're trying to do, and you're saying that's not an available option, but I see what you're trying to do, and I will give you a way to do something else.
Right.
In that realm, or in that vein, or that's going to pay off later. I'm going to say no to you now, but down the line.
Like an example of this would be, let's say they find a dwarven rune carved into a stone door, and everybody's going to say, okay, well, I want to read, whatever these runes are. Does anybody speak Dwarvish? No. Okay, well, you can't read it, but I know that what it says, and I want them to have some information. I want to reveal to them a little bit, at least a small piece of what's going on. So I might say, no, but you can make an Arcana check. Oh, okay, with the successful Arcana check, you recognize that the rune for fire is repeated several times in this thing. You don't recognize what the rest of this stuff means, but you know that the Dwarven word for fire, because you've studied magic, is embedded in this thing several times. Oh, okay, well that gives them some idea of where to go with this or whatever, right?
Absolutely.
So that's my brief kind of like for it. We're really saying the same things. Like yes, therefore is similar to.
Listen to the players
no,
and try and steer with them, not specifically against them.
The easiest answer to give your players is no, or you don't know, and that I will say very few things that are like big, put it in bold print rules, but saying no or saying don't know is a huge red flag, and you should not do it. You should avoid saying no or you don't know as often as possible, right? Because if you give them a little bit of an avenue to pursue, then they've got an action that they can take, right? So I'm going to get into a little bit of DM theory here, but at its very core fundamental roots here, it is D&D is a conversation, right? And if they don't have information, then they can't take an action. And the loop for being a DM is the party gets information, they do something, you respond and give them more information, they do something, and this way the plot progresses.
Yep.
When you say, no, you don't know. Okay, I'm going to examine the lock. Does it look like I can open it? No.
It's like,
All right. Look at the...
well, I guess I will,
Did they look at the hinges? There's no hinges on this side.
No hinges.
Okay.
It's actually a wall.
Is there a handle?
And then your players shut down, and then no one's
Right.
having fun.
And you're now you can say it doesn't look like you could open it, but it looks you don't see a keyhole that you could put a key in, but it looks like very fine craftsmanship that might be elven. Oh, okay. Do I know any like famous elven thieves? You know, now you give them information and they can respond, even if you just give them a little bit.
And then they give you information that you can play
Or
off
they take
of,
an
and
action.
then
Yeah.
it just becomes a wonderful cycle of
Right.
gameplay.
But when you say no or you don't know,
Yeah.
everybody goes, okay, well, I don't, all right.
I mean,
I don't know what to do
the
next.
best response to "Can I do this?" is my go-to line is "You may certainly try."
Yeah.
And
Right.
see what happens. And if I've had players come up with using a rat that they found as a weapon because they threw it at someone, so they would have to try and catch it. You know, and if I had said no, we would have lost an entire amazing storyline of what happened with that rat. But because my player wanted to do this really creative thing, and no, a rat's not a typical weapon, but sure, you want to throw it at someone and make them try and catch it, now they're going to have to roll a dex check. Now there's, otherwise they have a rat clawing at their face.
I think the other part of it that's hard is there is a little bit of a culture of I sit behind this DM screen and I have all of my secret notes. And because we have made these notes like on our own, separately, away from everybody else, and it very explicitly says at the beginning of every adventure, like on page 2, if you are a player, do not read this far. And it gives it this kind of like weight or presence that says the players should not know this stuff. And if you carry that over into your DMing, you're hurting your game. Your job is actually to take the stuff that's written down and feed it out to them.
Yeah, though I will say if you are a player and your DM is running an adventure, a printed adventure for you, don't go read it.
You're stealing their job.
Yeah,
That's cheating.
It's cheating. And it though, if your DM is an experienced DM, they tend to then change it on the fly, which, if I have players walk in and go, "Oh, this is the place where we're going to fight the dragon, right?" And I'm going,
how would you know that?
it's like, no, this is the place where you're going to fight a beholder.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm in no way advocating that your players should try and get that information without you. But I will say that it's your job as the DM to work hand in glove with them to get that information. So it. By virtue of how it's set up, it feels like, oh, I have secrets and they're precious. The truth is, your secrets don't do you any good if they stay on the page.
Yeah.
Your secrets only become interesting when you give them over to the players and they start exploring them.
Absolutely.
Right? Whether it's something as boring as the milkmaid has been, stealing silverware and storing it in the barn, or it's something as interesting as the Duke is actually a doppelganger or whatever, right?
That's so good.
So think about that. It sort of came up in chat, but I think before we move on to talk about running the adventure, which we've done a little bit, just to kind of cap off running the table, you wanted to talk, I know, about sort of before you even start playing the game, having a little, if not a session zero, at least kind of a talk before you start playing about what the game is going to be like.
I'm a big fan of session zeros. I think they're very important, especially if you're playing with people you don't know well, to establish kind of a common agreement on what you're doing. It's a social contract of what kind of game you're playing, what you're comfortable with. As a DM, knowing what your players are comfortable with and making sure that you've established some ground rules. I have a few of those bold type kind of rules that I have at my table because I think it's important in order to dive into a story as deeply as you can. You need to know what's okay with your players and where they are comfortable and if there are lines you should not cross in your game. So I think it's important to talk about what is appropriate. So for example, at my tables, I don't, if you use any sort of slurs for any individuals, you're out. That's end of game, DM screen gets packed up, we're done. You're not coming back to the game, ever. Same with sexual assault of PCs or NPCs. Any relationships between characters, any romantic stuff, we take an out-of-game moment to discuss and make sure everybody's cool with. At the beginning of my session zero, I ask people if they privately want to let me know if they have phobias or certain things that they would like to not have come up in game. And my job is to make sure that's respected. Because if your players are uncomfortable, the game is no longer fun.
And you don't necessarily have to ask people to air all of that stuff in front of everybody else, right? You can sit down and say, hey, you know, if anybody has something that they want to take off the table and set aside on the script, we can write it down. One thing that I like to do is I will often have a little questionnaire.
I do too.
And it will have kind of fundamental things in it, kind of like what style, trying to ascertain.
Do you like combat heavy?
Yeah, exactly.
Heavy,
like let's figure out what kind of
heavy.
player you are. Yep. And then it will also say, is there anything in this game that you want to keep off limits for whatever reason, right? So that's one way that somebody doesn't have to say in front of 3 or 4 people that they don't know, like, oh, well, actually, I've been sexually assaulted and I don't want to have any of that at the table. It's not fun, you know, for me to reflect on that experience.
And just as a general rule, sexual assault is just, there's pretty much no need for that to be in a game. And that's something that is so personal and so unfortunately common that it's a much safer call to say that's not something that we have at our table.
Right. Or the flip side of that is you need to establish before you even form as you're forming the group, saying there are going to be these elements in it, and if it's not for you, pull the ripcord and get out. It's okay, I understand. If you want to explore, for instance, slavery, you know, that can be very much a hot button issue for many people, regardless of their race or skin color, right? But then it's also your job up front to say, oh yeah, we're going to kind of explore some elements of slavery in this campaign setting. There's some stuff in there. Maybe I'm not planning to get too deep into it, but if this is going to make you uncomfortable, like you don't have to play. I totally get it. If you're intent on running that game, right? If you're intent on exploring those issues, hopefully you are going about it thoughtfully, with purpose, and considering a bunch of different perspectives rather than just willy-nilly throwing it in there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's a couple of great tools that have been mentioned in chat. Xcard is one of them. Script change is also one of them.
Yeah, script change is closer to the Luxton technique, which is what I use at my table,
Okay.
which allows players. I mean, the short version of it is if you have a player who has a traumatic issue, they are given the permission to narrate that however they want it narrated, or to say, I need this result. I need this character to come out of this alive. I need for this to resolve peacefully. I need a happy ending. It gives people a way that feels safe to explore that in a fantasy world, which, as some of you may know, D&D is now being used therapeutically, clinically, with everything from autism to PTSD, social skills. So there is a wonderful space that this can occupy in helping people process trauma and explore things that may be difficult, but
Right.
it's establishing clear parameters. So I really like the Luxton technique, and script changes is similar to that.
And it, it may feel like this is a very like heavy topic to discuss, especially when you're starting out DMing. But what I would encourage you to do is to at least take a moment and think about, oh, what if something bad happens in my game? And just get ahead of it and how you're going to handle it, rather than you're all playing along and then you introduce this scenario where it's like, yeah, and then you all get captured by the ferocious hobgoblin army and they strip you of all of your weapons and all of your clothes. And then all of a sudden, you realize that the next thing that's coming out of your mouth is starting to make either you or somebody at the table uncomfortable, or even worse, you don't realize that the next thing coming out of your mouth is doing that, and now all of a sudden you got an active situation that gets out of hand, and two people don't care, and it's like super fun, and like, oh, this is great, or whatever, and then somebody else at the table, meanwhile, is getting very uncomfortable. And it's the same thing at a dinner party. If somebody has a food allergy, you want to get ahead of that. Let's not put, whatever it is. Let's not have poppy seed.
Let's not cook that if that's.
Yeah, let's not cook that if that's.
Yeah,
So.
I think and it is part of my session 0 is having that conversation, but it is not the entirety of my session 0. And I tend to lighten things up after, but I always preface by, okay, we're going to talk about a couple things that are heavier right now, but we're doing this now so that we establish this and we have the rules down. And then from there, you can assume that it's going to be safe unless someone is saying whatever predetermined situation you're using or tool you're using to manage situations like that unless someone says I am using the X card or whatever, you're okay. It's okay to be going where you're going, so everybody feels very comfortable. So
I don't want to have like a huge discussion of what a session 0 is or whatever, but what would be a quick thumbnail for you in terms of here's what would be in a session 0? So if somebody wanted to kind of like look it up and think about like what does even that mean? What does a session 0 mean? Usually it means it's a get together before you actually start the campaign with the characters or the adventure, and kind of it's an out of game kind of.
Conversation about what the game's going to be. So I guess for me I do player surveys as well. It's discussing what mechanics I use as a DM. I generally use rules as written versus I want rules as written, I want rules as intended.
You have house rules.
This is the material you're allowed to use to roll up your character. How do you guys like to handle this? Do you want to do you want to roll for stats or do you want to take standard array? Do you want to have a more comedic campaign that's silly and goofy and really lighthearted, or do you guys want to go do something really dark? Do you want to do Ravenloft? Do you want to go get into kind of the grittier worlds? Talking about play styles, then going over specific rules like that. Then we come back to, I'm trying to remember what I have. I have a 5-page document I do, because I DM often for groups of strangers who may or may not know each other. It's not convention play, but it's... And with those kind of groups, that's when you really need to have more control over what the table is going to be.
And I think that, one of the other takeaways here is if you're running an ongoing game, you don't necessarily have to pack all of this stuff into your session 0, because you're going to be able to check in with people after each session and say, are you having fun? You seemed kind of tuned out for some reason. And it can be as simple a question as that. Obviously you want to try and avoid weirdness, awkwardness, uncomfortable situations ahead of time if you can, but a convention game where people are going to come together for 4 hours and have this kind of like intense experience and then walk away and really have no way to have feedback or confront something strange that happened in the game, then it's important to like go through this. I think if in an ongoing game, it's a good idea to do at least some version of a session 0. But your ace in the hole is you get to come back and check in with everybody to just see if they're having fun. How could this game be more fun for you? That's a great question to ask anybody.
I tend to check in kind of almost with the leveling system. I check in kind of after the first session and say, hey, how was that for everybody?
Right.
Is there something you'd like more of, less of? And then I sort of start spacing those out to less and less frequently. But I do try and check in with my players in the beginning, every couple of weeks to say, hey, how's this going? Are you happy with where we're headed? And is there something you want more of or less of? One other thing that I discussed in my session 0 that I think is an important one is character death. How do you feel about having your character die in the game? Some people want to keep their characters forever. Some people don't care as long as it's a meaningful death and makes sense in the story. Some people are like, I've got 7 level 1s ready to go. Throw it at me. Just give me the combat.
Yeah.
So it's establishing what your players are wanting in terms of combat difficulty and in terms of whether they're willing to give up their characters or not. Because character death with someone who does not want their character to die can be a game ender for them. They can literally walk out the door and never come back.
Right.
So that's another one that I think does well to go into that conversation.
All right. So we've talked quite a bit now kind of about running the table. I think that covers a lot of the basics of running your game. Obviously, there's stuff like try to start on time. I am ambivalent on whether people have their phones at the table. Like, I used to be very hardcore, like, nobody needs their phone at the table, and you don't need to look at your phone, But I will tell you that there are people who love D&D who are also introverts, right? I mean, my wife being one of them. And she literally can't handle all of the conversation that's going on, and some people love it because they're able to express themselves and let's take charge, let's form a plan. And when she sits down at a table with somebody like that, she's like, this is way too much energy. I don't want to have to deal with this person, so she goes into her phone. But when I come around to her turn, she knows exactly what she wants to do. She knows what the situation is. She's still listening, etc., etc., etc. So she's still engaged in the game.
Right.
So I'm fine with it. It's when the phone...
That falls into the accessibility realm.
Yeah.
That falls into sometimes folks who have ADD or sensory processing issues, or they need that to be comfortable.
Yeah.
For other players, if you have a player who's constantly distracted by their phone, at that point, my general rule is I prefer no phones on the table.
Right.
I like. Something that's really special and unique about D&D is it's a group of people really coming together in a shared common imaginary space.
Yes.
And the coolest part of that is getting to share that with the other people at the table. Phones often will cut people off from that, and they'll get distracted and they'll start tweeting and you'll go way off track. So when you have a player who can manage having a phone and also stay engaged in the game, I'm totally okay with it. When it becomes distracting to everyone else and it's not an accessibility need, then I will be a little more hardline on that rule.
I have a very simple rule for this, which is, do I need to repeat myself? That's it.
Yeah.
As long as I don't need to repeat myself or restate the circumstances of what's happening, I don't, you can be involved in the game to whatever level you're ready to be involved in the game.
Yeah.
As long as when I come around to your turn, you know what's going on. Whatever you're doing on your own time, because D&D, like it or not, can very much be compartmentalized, where we roll initiative and you rolled badly and they all rolled good, so you sit here and wait while this person goes and this person goes and this person goes and this person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So if I'm this character, this player over here, I kind of don't blame them if they check out a little bit, right? If we come around to their turn and they have no idea what's going on, and I have to restate the circumstances or explain to them that the monster that they're targeting got killed 2 ticks ago, that's where I'm like, what's not connecting here? Help me let's get us both back into the game here, right? So that's my very simple kind of acid test.
And I think if you do have players checking out during combat, you might want to look at the way you're running combat too, because a lot of the time it's because someone's sitting there either not prepared for what they're going to do on their turn, or they have no plan at all, which they don't have to stick to it because things change before then, but know roughly what you're going to be doing, or that the combat narration is not dynamic enough for them that they're engaged and they're visualizing it. So I think tweaking your combat if you're finding that you're losing focus But I think that's
I think
true
it
in
goes
general.
back to something that we talked about earlier, which is consequences, right? And so the fundamental consequence in a combat is I roll to hit, I do X number of points of damage. But that is boring, right? That is not interesting. And so you can help keep your players engaged by saying, yeah, you smash him in the arm and he is hobbled a little bit or whatever it is because of your sword strike or your mace blow or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily baked into the game, but is definitely a technique that you'll see advanced dungeon masters or whatever that people will use to keep the visual picture going.
Yeah,
right?
keep describing. Always be describing. ABD.
Well, that kind of transitions us to our last topic of things to master in order to run this game, which is the adventure, right? And we've touched on some things about the adventure, but I think your advice that you gave at the top was rock solid, which is if you're going to run an out-of-the-box adventure or whatever, read it through, and understand. To me, it's more understand the story flow and the options and the plot points. It's not necessarily I need to digest every stat block and know every single monster. Yeah, I want to do that for my big bad guys that they might encounter. I want to know what interesting tactics they might bring or what some interesting features of the room might be. But I don't need to drill down on every single weird little detail, especially if it's 20 pages away and it doesn't seem like they're going to get to it. But what you do want to focus on is here's the incident that kicks the whole thing off, and then these are the options that kind of branch off of that, and where do those go? What's our little plot line? It could be as simple as A to B to C, but it could be more of a spider web where it branches, right? So that's great advice. I don't always follow that.
Yeah.
This is definitely like a do as I say, not necessarily. Anybody who watches my show knows, oh, Tom, you planned to get to this point, and you didn't make it. So there's a certain amount of preaching going on. I will cop to that.
There always is. When you're talking DM theory, it's always how it should theoretically go.
Right.
But in practice, everything changes on the fly.
Well, and we can't give advice to every single group, every single set of players, etc. Like your group is going to have fun their way.
Yeah.
We can only share in my general experience.
Yeah.
But definitely reading the adventure is one of them.
It's a really good one to know roughly where you're going in case, the character you just met turns out to be, a spy or, you want to have
when the characters go off the rails, I think it's important. We talked about improvising, yes and, no but, those sorts of techniques. I think it's an important thing to realize that when they decide that they're going to talk to the weird baker who just came out, and was yelling something about free cookies, instead of following the bandit who just stole the purse from the woman, across the street and scuttled down the alleyway. When they make those choices, your players are telling you what kind of game they want to play. And that means that what you have prepared may not necessarily reflect what they're interested in in that moment even. Like they could change next week. They'd be like, oh yeah, let's get back on
we should have found that bandit. How did we go get that bandit?
It turns out that jewel was in that pouch. We should really find out what happened to that. Well, yeah, but you want to be like, I told you so. But you need to respond to what they're interested in at that time.
Yeah.
If we go back to the cooking dinner kind of analogy, you may have set up like, hey guys, it's going to be Hawaiian night. I have a bunch of fruit, and they show up and they're like, oh, I could just go for pizza.
Sometimes you just order the pizza.
Okay. Right, yeah.
Sometimes you go, this will keep. We'll put it in the fridge and let's get a pizza.
Sometimes you're like, well, why don't we have Hawaiian pizza and we'll put pineapple on the pizza? So you can find a way to to make those things merge.
Absolutely.
But it's easy to fight your players or have the idea that like, I spent 3 hours reading this and now you want to talk to this baker guy and you get frustrated and upset with them.
Yeah.
But instead, they're actually doing you a favor. They're like, oh, this is the kind of game that we want to play right now. Okay.
Yeah.
It takes some nimbleness.
Well, and the
to
other thing you
follow
can
that.
do for that is you be prepared with a few standard NPCs on the side and a few standard encounters on the side that you can throw in wherever you need to go.
Yes.
So if they do take a left turn and you are not prepared for it, because as much as some of this stuff, you're prepping 25 rooms and you get that already, and then all of a sudden they go on the other path outside the door and don't ever hit the dungeon, you've got to have something for them to do. So having a few small quest hooks, short quest hooks where that you can steer them back to where you need them to go, and having some, there are great NPC generators out there, there are great encounter builders out there.
I think you can. It can be as simple as make a list of 8 things, right? So make a list of 8 names that would fit into your world. Make a list of 8 NPCs, 8 shops. Maybe even like 8 interesting items that they might find. Because the classic thing that you will encounter is they go, oh, okay, well, we go into the stable and we search the stable. And you're like, you don't, again, this is one of those cases where you want to say, you don't find anything.
Yeah.
We search, what do we find? Nothing. No, nothing. No, but that's not an interesting answer. That doesn't open up the story, right? Yeah. Even if they don't find anything, you can have some sort of consequence happen.
Yeah.
So give them more information.
Now you smell like horse, which means that this is going to happen.
Right.
That you're not detected by these people because they didn't smell you coming.
Or even something completely, like whatever was supposed to happen in the story happens like at this point, right? Yeah. So you're busy searching the stable. This place is fairly clean, fairly tidy. It looks like the stable hand does a good job. And just as you're lifting that last hay bale to look underneath and see if there's anything hidden behind it, all of a sudden this guy comes racing in with his pouch and goes whistling through the barn.
Yeah.
Okay, well now we have something. We have information. We have something.
Followed.
Oh, it was that guy that we saw in the alley. Let's get him.
Exactly,
What's that? Then we must, I'm not saying it necessarily has to be like heavy-handed, but if you have a list of 8 things that you could find where you're kind of like, oh, this could be related to my story.
Yep.
But just make short lists. One of the things that I sometimes recommend is instead of making a list, make a deck of index cards. And so these are my NPCs, and I have a name and a personality trait, and maybe something about their appearance, and maybe like a deal for them.
The Mike Shea Lazy Dungeon Master is a great resource for how to do that technique too.
But you don't have to write a lot of information on there, and then you can pull a person from the deck and go, oh, Caleb shows up. He's got a scar that goes over his eye. It looks like he has a blurred pupil there. And he comes in with kind of a cocky swagger and is like, what are y'all searching the barn for? Well, all right, now all of a sudden we've got an entry to an NPC. What I can do is I can take my note card, and as I start creating facts, improvising, you can write them down on that little card and then set that aside. And the next time Caleb shows up, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. As a matter of fact, he did talk to the Duke about the missing horses, and
my bards got to a town and they're like, hey, we want to put on a rock concert. And I was like, okay. And there were 2 teenagers in the town who then suddenly recognized them. And this thing became a rager, but there was stuff happening outside that they didn't know about because they were busy rocking out. But the rock concert was awesome and ended up having great stories that came out of that.
Right.
So now the consequences of that are going to be whatever was happening outside, they don't know about because they didn't go that way. But also they've gained some renown as superstars, and now every town they go to, they're going to be expected to play a concert.
I think that brings up a really great point, which is, as the DM, I feel like, oh, I've studied this thing, there's this whole story, here's how it's supposed to unfold, and these are the different paths you could take through it, and I'm going to try and guide them through it. But you also have to realize that it's the player's game as well. And so if they want to stop and have a silly moment where they spend 2 hours making camp and arguing about who's going to be on watch and what weird creative things that they want to do.
Setting up a Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah,
for
they
an alert.
decide that it gets turned into this whole like we're doing this little hunting trip in order to figure out I want a brace of rabbits and it turns into a whole scene that you hadn't planned. It isn't germane to the story. That's okay, right? Unless you're playing a convention game where you only have 4 hours, it's okay to let them indulge in scenes that seem silly, that seem frivolous. That's how they're having fun. And if you can make that scene even more fun and interesting and indulge in whether it's serious or frivolous or whatever it is, heighten the experience of what's happening, that's where you're now contributing and doing your job as a DM. It's not just spoon feeding them.
Yeah.
Here's the story, guys. You got to stay on
and
it.
sometimes stuff happens in your life. D&D for a lot of people is an escape, and sometimes the real world gets too heavy, and you are expecting to be able to do this intense story or whatever, wherever you are in the thick of it, and you just want to cause chaos sometimes, or you want to throw a rock concert.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes the player's real life has shifted that changes and informs what they're comfortable doing in the game at that point, and what they're needing from the game. So being flexible to that is really always going to be the best way to go. And then they will give you gold. They will give you stuff. I have an entire, I hope none of my players are watching this, but I have an entire arc that's coming up in my campaign where my players are going to play higher tier. It's all based on one character's backstory that he gave me.
Right.
They have no idea.
Right.
Oh, if they're watching, they do now. But they are. It all came from some stuff they gave me.
I think one of the great DM techniques that you can employ is reincorporating stuff, right? Whether that's stuff that the characters have created, I have something in my backstory that then you kind of you weave into the game, or it's something that maybe you made up as a result of, they searched the barn. Okay, you find a necklace that has it's a locket with a picture of a very shriveled old man in it, and he's a halfling. Then if you can reincorporate that later, then the players really feel like you've woven this entire world that's cohesive.
And really, you just picked up on one small detail that happened in the game, and you put it back in, and they go, "Oh, it was this all along!"
Yeah.
And they think you're awesome, and you feel really cool, even though you just went, "Oh, I thought that was funny." I thought, sure,
but
why not?
but you were really cool, right? Like
Yeah.
I think kind of the takeaway here in terms of combining these things is it's folly to try and pre-plan everything and go, okay, well, I'm going to spoon feed them this locket that has this guy in it and it has this name on the back, which is actually this command word, so that 7 sessions from now, when they walk up to the little halfling hut and the door says, speak password and enter,
They know the password.
Yeah, they know the password because it's on the locket. Well, chances are
They've forgotten
about it. They don't remember whoever has the locket. Maybe they wrote it down on their character sheet or not. They certainly didn't write down like what it was. Like pre-planning that sort of cause and effect web of events is very dangerous. But being able to reincorporate, to pluck stuff that they are aware of, that is in the top of their mind. Oh yeah, what do you think the deal is with this locket that we found in this barn? I don't know. Well, let me look at it again. And you give them a little more information about it or whatever. The halfling wizard, you notice that on his collar, he's got a little silver crescent moon on his collar when you look closer at the picture. Oh, okay. Then maybe that crescent moon starts popping up in other places. Well, it brings it into their consciousness. Even if you're just improvising these details, as long as you track them and they stay floating in the minds of the players, the world seems pre-planned and coherent and cohesive, even though you're making stuff up as you go.
I was talking to someone who's about to start a new campaign the other day, and this is a campaign he's spent a very long time creating. And he's got this world, and he has the story, and part of what he was telling me as he was doing it was, this is how the end goes. And I kind of went, you shouldn't know the end right now. Like, you have no idea what you're going to have in your world yet. So the end may change completely, or the end may become what you think is your big boss may become a mid-boss, because you realize that this threat would be much more interesting if XYZ. But it was this idea of they must live the story that I have created.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not D&D.
That's very difficult to pull off as a dungeon master, and you have to have a specific set of players who are cooperative in an unusual way to make that happen.
Yeah.
There
and
are
often players will feel hamstrung by that, and you will get frustrated when they don't do what you want them to.
well, and part of what it comes back around to is when they start to deviate from the story and say, "Oh, okay, do we go talk to the drover who's in charge of the caravan that's going out of town. Does he know anything about these weird troll attacks?" Nope. That's my dog. You start finding yourself telling them, "No, he doesn't know anything.
The reaction
He can't
was
tell
right,
anything."
though.
Yeah, right. So that's where it gets. That's where you know that you're like shutting down the players in favor of your storyline.
Yeah.
Is you start having to either create a series of very obvious coincidences.
Yeah.
It just so happens. That's one of those things where, like I just described, the guy from before comes running into
Yep.
the barn. Sometimes that can be a little too convenient, and the players will be like,
Well, that was lucky.
"All right, wow,
And
weird
see,
that he's
that
showing
happened
up."
in my campaign. They had met a character early on.
Yeah.
They stuck it out. They were carrying a familiar, a wizard's familiar, and even once they figured out that it was a familiar, they kept carrying it around. Their
Yeah.
enemy's familiar. So they met this guy. They set him free. They turned him loose. They ran into him again. It seemed very convenient that they would run into him where he
Right.
was. Definitely was not him. Was a doppelganger. And they just didn't pick up on it because they went, "Oh, we met this guy and he's back." And
Yeah.
it's like, he's back, but he's not back.
He's not. Yeah, you're always walking when you're whether you're following an adventure that's pre-written or you're trying to freelance around an adventure that's pre-written or you're trying to create your own. You're always trying to find that balance between what's a strong goal
Yep.
and how are things connected, and then what's believable, right? What's the suspension of disbelief? It's too convenient that that guy would be here.
And if it's
But
that convenient,
okay.
then why would it happen?
Yeah.
Was someone spying on them? Was it that X, Y, and Z happened? Is it a planar thing? Is it, there
Yeah.
could be all of these reasons. If you're going to have a moment that's super coincidental, acknowledge that it's really coincidental, and then work off of that and let that be an interesting.
You have to give the
Okay.
players a strong through line to follow, which means that events are connected.
Yeah.
But you can't give them such a narrow through line to follow that they feel like they don't have any agency in how this direction of the
Yeah.
story goes, right? So that's one of the really tough things about your job as the DM is to find the things that motivate them and give them clues that keep the story moving forward. Reveal information that keeps the story moving forward
Yeah.
without just hitting him in the head with the clue bat going, "Guys, you're supposed to be doing this."
Yeah, and by the same token, if there's some information that you need them to have, don't put it behind a high-level skill check. Don't make them.
Don't hide it.
Don't
yeah.
give them the opportunity to fail at acquiring this information that you need them to have to make things progress.
If they fail, then find a different way for them
Exactly.
to explore and investigate it,
Yeah.
right? That's again the no but or there's consequences.
Right.
So I think that's it's something that it changes with every group. It changes with every storyline. I can tell you, I have a great set of players. They get bogged down in making camp. Like, eventually we have to get to this tower, but
Yeah, my players don't enjoy random encounters. So
You know.
we did one, and it was not a fun thing, and so we have not had another random encounter.
yeah.
Because they just really didn't enjoy it as they were traveling. In a
Right.
dungeon, it's a different story, but as they were traveling, it was not a particularly fun thing for that group.
I have a whole separate rant on random encounters, and generally, my short take on it is don't put encounters into your game that you don't know why they're there.
Yeah.
If the only function is for them to just pop up and be a bag of hit points to slam with your sword, it's not worth your time. It doesn't advance the story. It doesn't illuminate what's going on in any meaningful way. Other than sometimes your players are antsy or they've had a bad week or whatever it is, and they just want to have
Smash things
the
with
game
their
of
axe.
combat, right? It has nothing to do with
And
the storytelling.
sometimes you haven't had the time to prep that you would like to, so
Right.
if you can eat up 2 hours with some fun combat.
Yeah, and the focus being on, is it a fun combat,
Yeah.
right? And generally, most random encounters are not fun.
The better way to do it
they
is...
don't have an interesting location.
Yeah.
The monster very rarely has interesting or intelligent tactics that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of it, it goes, they find 2 potions of healing and 32 gold
Yep,
pieces.
exactly.
And the most interesting outcome of the whole 2 hours that you spent fighting this thing is 2 people have to fight over who's going to write down the healing potion or not, right?
The
So-
better way to do random encounters is have actual fully written encounters. You know, have you come off the path and you find a hut, and there's this, that, and the other thing, and there's a hag inside and she's doing this thing, and
Right.
you know, have small side quests that are basically ultimately will boil down to I hit it with my axe, but there's some sort of mini arc within it.
I think it's also a matter of, you don't have to like script out complete encounters. You just have to know how this thing that's happening could be connected to the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, well, we find a troll who's picking over the remains of a broken wagon, and you have to fight the troll. But at the end of it, there's a whole opportunity, like, what's in the wagon? Was there a survivor who's buried underneath, who's crushed and hurt underneath, or unconscious? Is there...
Lining the trunk, you find letters from the Duke
Right.
saying that, you know, giving orders so that this clearly was a spy, and oh,
Or even, like, who is the troll working for? Like, there's why is that thing there, and does it intersect with your storyline and what's happening? Or is it a reflection of your storyline and what's happening? Oh, there's a war going on. Okay, well, this is showing you that these are supplies that were being sent to the front, and somebody ratted on somebody, and the supply train got attacked.
but now what do? Can you
You
take
know?
those if it was going to the enemy front? Do you take that wagon and do you put on disguises and do you poison that food to get to the front? Because that's one way to go. Just letting them using it to open up your world rather than squish it down.
Exactly, or rather than just not have it do anything,
Yeah.
right? And that's my big problem with random encounters, is that they don't reveal any additional information. They exist solely to eat up time.
Yep.
And your players will find ways to entertain or engage whatever plaything that they want to engage. If they want to have a fight, they'll find a way to get into a fight, or you can find a way to invent a fight for them. You don't need to roll on a chart at some like awkward moment and then just decide, well, this has to happen because this is what the dice say.
Right. The dice are there to help steer the game and add some interesting wrinkles into the game. They're not there to dictate. That's why you have people there, is to tell the story.
I don't know what else we want to say about running an adventure.
I
I would say that I got one thing. I want to say start simple if you're going to create your own.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a beginning DM. There's 2 things I want to say about this. Sorry. Start simple. You don't have to prep a bunch of things. If the players figure out what's going on, there's always more adventure to be had. If they solve it, great. That's what they want to do, as long as they felt like it was a big enough challenge. And if they don't solve, if they solve it too quickly, in your opinion, which is a dangerous kind of attitude, well, then also it turns out that guy's working for somebody else, and the story gets more and more complicated. Like, your ability to generate stuff is only limited by your time and your imagination, right?
Absolutely.
It is not. You don't have to plot out, this is the 15 episodes and ways to go. So start simple, start small, but also you're probably playing with a new group, and very simple things will engage them. If they find a door that talks, or a frog that talks, or a magic sword that interacts with them or something like that, they think that's amazing. If they find a cloak that glows on command, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Like, it's the magic of the world that's happening.
Yeah.
They love that.
Well, and what else is really fun with those kind of items is in Xanathars, they gave you so many great minor magical items. They don't do much, but what they do is fun and flavorful. And so those are the kind of things that I will let my players find.
Right.
Because I do like having magic in my world. I think it's really fun. So, there are simple things you can get in there that are not going to shift the dynamic of the game. You're not going to give them a +3 weapon. You're going to give them, the stein that you can drink out of and drink out of and drink out of, and it doesn't get you drunk. So now they're going to go around to every tavern they can find, taking on the strumpiest dwarf they can find to a drinking contest.
Right.
Handily winning it and building their reputation and winning information or gold or a night at the inn, whatever it is. So you've giving them tools that are flavorful. That's the other thing I will say is if you are playing an adventure with pre-existing treasure, consider reflavoring it so that it's useful to your group. Because if the rewards are not exciting for your group to get, it's just kind of disappointing to go, we've gone through this entire dungeon. I survived this entire dungeon and all I got was this stupid t-shirt.
Right.
You really want them to have some things that feel
something
like,
personal,
yeah.
right? Or
if you have a rogue, get a dagger in there or a crossbow, whatever your rogue uses. Maybe have something pop up that's valuable to them.
I would say an easy way to do that is to give it an item to give them items that have some sort of history attached to them, right? So give them, if you're going to give them a dagger, whether it's magical or not, maybe it just glows, right?
Yeah.
But have it inscribed with a name. Oh, you recognize this as the famous dagger of, I meant marquise as in French, not mark. I almost said marquis mark. But it might have somebody's name on it and have a little history that they know or can discover about it, and that opens up their imagination and gets them engaged with what's going on.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a dagger that glows, whoop-de-scoot, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems like a boring item, but that sort of possibility that's presented by this thing really gets your players engaged. So yes, definitely feel free to reskin or kind of fancy up with lore versus fancy up with let's give it a bunch of new abilities. Because a very easy trap to fall into is oh yeah, and it also has poison that you can issue anytime you want. And next thing you know, they're going around the bar going blurp, 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 blurp.
Yeah.
Why can't I poison everybody's drink while they're all watching the fire out front?
Yeah.
It's it's not supposed to. I get your dagger runs out of charges. What?
You never said it had charges. It never had charges. It doesn't have charges. What are you talking about? So yeah, it's definitely going off of how you can make things flavorful. I love flavor in games. I feel like that's what differentiates D&D from
but it
an RPG.
Doesn't require a ton of detail.
Yeah.
It doesn't require a lot of work. It's just these small, simple things. When a new group of players encounters a dragon for the first time, they're blown away.
It better blow their minds too. That encounter needs to be epic. It's half of the name of the game.
Right.
But even things like, hey, you just killed a bunch of things that were not goblins. You just killed your first humanoids. How are you sitting with that? Has your character ever killed anybody before? What's that doing to them?
Right.
And reward players that invest in the game. When you have players investing in the game, either give XP, give faction reputation, give items.
The easy thing to do is give them inspiration.
Yeah.
Right? That's free and it's built into the game and everybody understands it. Yeah. I think what we're just saying about the other thing about running an adventure is it's very easy to just reskin monsters and describe them however you want, right? So you might have a monster that is a column of sand that rises up and attacks them and ensnares them and tries to strangle them or whatever. Well, guess what? You can take the stats for a water weird and just go, oh, okay, well, it doesn't swim, it burrows, and it looks like a pile of sand instead of a snake, water snake in a fountain, and there you go, right? You can describe things in a different way and just reskin that monster and put a different look on it, and maybe instead of worrying about, well, what did the exact stats for a zombie bear be, you can just take the stats for an ogre and call it good enough.
Yeah.
Your players really have, unless they've memorized the monster manual, which is tedious,
What they do it anyway. You always run into one.
They don't
There's
need
always
to know.
one.
Well, and if you have that character, that's what that's a
But then
great
you
way
need-
to
then you
derail
go, well,
them.
why don't you take that? Why don't you make your next? Why don't you take Sage as a feat? Why don't you?
But I was
as
saying you
background,
can
but-
derail them by going by taking a troll
and changing
saying
it up.
it's 3 conjoined goblins who keep growing limbs over and over, and then a new goblin appears, and then one of them dies and gets eaten by the other goblins, and all of a sudden that's a super weird and engaging creature. But it's got the stats of a troll, and they don't know that, and they're not sure what it is. But you know that, and you don't have to make any game stats up.
Going, oh yeah, the breath weapon is 60 feet, and I've gotten him to burn it, so now we're good. That's when you go, no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Defeats the purpose of the challenge.
Oh no, and the acid also burns away all of your gear.
So definitely like reskin monsters. I think we want to get to some Q&A here yet today too. So the final thing that I want to say for your beginning DM, which means that you probably have beginning players, is make it clear to the players that you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and that it's a little bit more Lord of the Rings than it is Harry Potter. And I explicitly say that because especially if you're playing with a younger group of players, or you're all a younger group of players, when they come to the game and they don't know anything about D&D, their experience of the fantasy world 98% of the time is shaped around, oh, I read Harry Potter, or I watched the movies, and this is what happened, right? And unfortunately, the magic system in Harry Potter is completely different than the way that D&D works. So they'll be like, oh, I want to play a spellcaster, Expellarius. Well, that's not the way D&D works. So I would just have you caution your party to understand that, this is more in a Lord of the Rings style world than it is a Harry Potter style.
The other thing to keep in mind too is with beginning players, you often are dealing with people playing idealized versions of themselves. And that's something that can teach you a lot about who your players are, but it's also something that can make them particularly sensitive to things happening to their characters. And so often you'll see people, I joke that the paladin is like the beginning. Every new player comes in and is like, I'm a paladin, I'm a hero, and people can get very, people, especially with a first character, and especially if you're doing a first character death, that is something you want to be very cautious with, because those characters are really, really special to these people. They pour everything into it. So keeping that in mind as you go, you can learn a lot about your player as well as their character in that sort of situation.
And I remember when I started playing, and it's funny that you bring that up, but I made a couple fighter characters as my first couple of experiences with D&D, because it was, the easiest thing to do or whatever, right? But I remember I had grand plans for this one character. He was going to survive the Lost City, and I wanted him to get these magical axes. Like, your players will get way ahead of like what they take the story off on their own, right? Which is great because that gives you cues for like, oh yeah, and you find this axe blade is the haft is broken off. There's no handle for it, but this axe blade. Oh great, well I'm gonna take this. This means something, right? But if you don't play into that, I made this guy and I had all these fanciful designs, and then he died like the third room in. And I was crestfallen. I was so bitterly disappointed. And the guys I was playing with were 2 years older, and I don't think they wanted to play D&D with me. And I'm fairly certain, in hindsight, I didn't know it at the time, that they deliberately killed off my character.
Don't do that.
You don't do that. I mean, that's just rude.
Mean.
Anyhow,
If the player's not working, talk to the player.
But it comes back to those first characters that you make the first time you play D&D you're so invested, and you spend so much mental energy conjuring what they look like and what they're going to fight like and what their story's going to be like. Even if you can't follow that path, you really get disappointed and frustrated when your character dies. Or if you're the DM and you're like, oh yeah, well, okay, you narrowly survived, but he cuts off an arm, and all of a sudden you're like, no, he's a 2-weapon fighter. Like, you can get personally offended by that.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's when you bring in a mentor who like fights with some cool like
That's when you
magical
give the
foot
guy a
chain with.
magic arm. That's
Well,
all you got.
one is an arm and one is you kick with a leg that's been weaponized.
Yeah,
and,
something.
Like you can do all sorts of cool stuff.
But even
So-
if you have like that cool move planned as a DM, the player doesn't know that, and they
Right,
will get
and they will
mad
get
at
upset.
you. You will cause a social problem at the table, even though you're thinking to yourself, "Oh wait, I'm gonna give him a magic arm. He's really gonna love this."
So it's again, it's listening to your players and communicating with your players. And if it's gonna be okay, it's okay as a DM out of game to say, hey, just so you know, it's gonna be okay. Like, I promise, go with me on this. Just trust me on this. But you have to build that trust and you have to earn that trust, which is
Right.
part of brings me back to
Right.
why session 0 is important. I think the last thing I would want to say is I have something I call the level 2 DM, which is so often people will start DMing having watched streams and watching people who have been playing for years and years and years and years and know the game inside and out. You know, they watch Critical Role and they go, oh my gosh, my game is going to be Critical Role. And they forget that these are trained actors, these are people who've been playing for ages,
Yeah.
and in a show with the whole crew standing by to help get everything and make everything look great. And
And they're people who've been cast for that show, right? To be personalities that intersect
Right.
with each other to form a great party.
Yeah, but as a new DM, I had somebody say, oh, I just DM'd one game and I totally blew it and it sucks and I'm never going to DM again. It's like, you, my friend, are not even a level 2 DM. Your characters in your game have not even leveled yet. You cannot expect yourself to be doing these things yet because you are a level 2 DM. You're going to see exponential growth, and it'll align with the leveling system. In the beginning, you'll get faster and faster and faster. You'll understand more. You'll be able to take on new combat abilities. You know, you can tackle a combat that's much more complicated than it was when you first started. You can tackle juggling player storylines. You'll learn how to do these things as you go, but you have to be patient with yourself as a new DM that you're going to learn how to do those things as you go. It comes with practice, and it comes with going, I screwed up. I was not prepared for this. Next time, here's how I'm going to handle it.
Right. You know, I've been DMing for years. I always, at the end of a game, go, okay, what could have gone better? What didn't really pop? What weren't they interested in? What did I put out there that I thought was really great, and then they were not impressed by or didn't engage with? You know?
And pro tip for level 2 DMs, PvP at your table rarely ends well.
Yeah.
It causes much more conflict than it solves, so don't have players who are trying to kill each other.
But beginning players, like that's something that's like very appealing to them, is like, oh, I want to exercise the mechanics of my character.
Charm person on my buddy.
You know, yeah, and that's, I don't know how to go get into a fight, so why don't we just fight each other? Seems like a very kind of like video gamey type, like convenient thing to do. But it rarely, like, because people are so invested in their characters, it really does destroy the social contract of what's happening.
It takes away one of the character's autonomy usually.
Yeah.
Same with, you know, PvP, meaning fighting characters, stealing from other characters, casting spells on other characters. That just all does not usually go well.
It goes back to those types of fights and scenarios don't ever reveal anything new, other than this character was tougher than this character in that moment. But it doesn't give you any more information about the story. It doesn't reveal any clues. It doesn't enlarge the world in a way that's meaningful whatsoever. Unless you have something where, you know, okay, well, the local constabulary shows up and the wizard casts hold person on everybody, and now all of a sudden you're all in jail, and you know, then it turns into a mess.
Yeah.
Right?
And similarly, if you're a DM or an inexperienced player, playing chaotic neutral characters also rarely ends well. That tends to take a whole lot of skill, because you often are antisocial and you're doing things just for your own character's edification and
I think
glory.
anything that's like chaotic or neutral to evil, even chaotic good characters can be troublemakers. You know, I would be aware of, in your session 0, you neither need to explicitly state, like, you're all a team, you all trust each other, you all work together.
Yep.
Or you can take a little more finesse approach and say, okay, what has happened that you trust the rest of the party? what have you done that makes you want to join this mission?
Why are you part of this, and
Yeah.
what's going to keep you here?
Ask them for in-character reasons rather than just explicitly, like, on a metagame level, pushing it out there.
The more tied together your players can be, your PCs can be, the better, because then they're going to stick around.
Yeah.
But yeah, chaotic neutral characters in particular tend to go chaotic jerkface.
Yes.
And evil characters can be done well, but again, you need to have a really smart
I don't think
player.
that's not a
and
beginner move
It's
at all.
not a really good thing for beginner DMs to allow. So the place I would say you can say no in D&D is in your session 0 and when you're rolling up characters. Even recently, I did not say no to something that I should have, and I ended up with a character in my game that was so overpowered, we ended up having to basically port him off to another dimension and bring something else in because there just was no balance.
Right.
And I've been doing this a long time, and it got so far away from me because I didn't want to say no in that case, and I absolutely should have, particularly after he rolled stats.
But, like we said, you went back and had a check-in after a session and said, hey, this seems overpowered. How can we fix this so it's fun for everyone?
Yeah.
Likewise, you can do that with somebody's alignment, with their character. Sometimes you have to have the uncomfortable...
together, because once the solution in this case was he needed to get swallowed by a portal. He had something he had stolen, he had a hand crossbow he had stolen. We ended up making that the gateway to the portal. Now, the characters in 14 levels would be able to go potentially rescue him from the place he got sent. So down the line, there may be a saying yes to that. But right now, the power balance is such that there was no way to balance that character with the rest of the group.
Right.
But it was the collaboration with the other player which got him A, excited about his new character, and B, excited to have this moment that nobody was expecting where he got sucked into a portal. Right before an important combat, too. Just ended up being great and has added so much to the game. Now he feels really cool. And now that character has a whole other storyline that we can get into when there's a place to address it.
Right. I think sometimes you have to have the conversation of how can we make the game more fun for you? And sometimes you have to recognize that you have to say the way that your character is structured or the item that you have or whatever the issue might be is making the game less fun for everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes you have to have the reverse or the inverse or the converse or whatever verse it is of that conversation with the player who's creating a problem in your game.
Yeah.
And, I guess my final piece of advice on GMing is play with people you like and play with your friends. And or become friends with them around the table. And if it's not working out and you're not enjoying it and people start doing stuff that you don't like, consider speaking up about it. You're not obliged to, but you're also not obliged to play with those people, If you sit down in a group and all of a sudden the whole game is about slavery or assault or something like that, and you're like, sorry guys, this isn't for me. It's okay to bail out. Like, there's not enough time to game to put up with a game that you don't like.
Yeah, it's true. It's
So.
true. And I guess my final piece of advice would just be, communicate with your table to bring the fun.
Yeah.
Talk to the people you're playing with. You are all working at this together as a collaborative storytelling experience. And if the best way to get there is to make sure everybody is having fun and really take the focus off of your own stuff, put it on the person next to you, because if everybody at the table does that, everyone is going to get these great shining moments of heroism and where they feel freaking awesome.
I will tell you, there's not enough DMs out there. I don't know if there will ever be enough DMs. Nobody wants to DM. And I will say that the reason that I DM is because if I think of something cool that can happen, I don't have to roll any dice. I don't have to negotiate with anybody. I get to decide and play out and play with that cool idea that happens.
Yeah.
Whether it was in the box to begin with or something that I thought up or something that the players said, to me, that's the joy of being a DM, is I get to watch the whole table light up when I go, yes, as a matter of fact, this ghostly hand manifests through the wall and touches you right in the middle of the forehead, and a rime of frost covers your face. What? I don't know. I just made that up. It's super fun.
Just came out of my head. No, you can also, if you want to dip your toe into GMing, but you're not ready to commit to running a campaign, you can try some of the no prep one shots or the no prep RPGs, stuff like 10 Candles, which I recommend everybody play because it will show you in spades what that collaborative storytelling feels like.
I think the person who made 10 Candles has a Kickstarter that's
he does.
going.
Yeah, Stephen Dewey has one.
It might be. It wrapped up in like half an hour.
Yeah, it's called Gathering.
Yeah.
But it's Stephen Dewey, and he's on Kickstarter.
It's amazing. Go check it out.
He is a brilliant designer.
I tweeted about it earlier today.
Good stuff.
Check it
about
out.
Yeah.
I would suggest, if you want to kind of further yourself along the path of being a better improvisational DM and whatnot, look at a game like Dungeon World or Apocalypse World, but mostly Dungeon World, just if you want to stay in the genre and whatnot. It'll teach you a lot about inventing consequences and creating circumstances that are interesting and whatnot. So I want to just briefly talk about, if I'm a starting DM, what do I need in my kit? And then we're going to take about 15 minutes worth of questions, right? So part of the whole impetus behind this whole discussion is I have a friend and her daughter's 14 and she's been playing some D&D with some of the boys from school, and she doesn't like the game that they're playing, and honestly they fight a lot and it doesn't sound like a great table. And so her mom messaged me and said, hey, she wants to DM, but she doesn't know what to do. And so I did a Twitter thread about it, and actually I put all of what I thought were relevant tips into a PDF that we have on Dropbox. I don't know, Dom, if you can share that link. But that should be accessible to everyone. So if you're curious about what are the tips that came out of that, specifically around the idea of she's 14, but she's a mature, well-read 14-year-old and whatnot. And here's one place without having to go through the whole Twitter thread of here's kind of all the advice kind of consolidated.
Yeah.
You can check that out. It's 2.5 pages, something like that. Some great basic beginner GM advice.
And also, we can't talk about this without talking about Matt Colville and going to check out his YouTube channel and his stuff. I'm plugging people who I think are amazing. But
I also like Mike Shea, who's Sly
Mike Shea's
Flourish on
great.
Twitter. He's very good. I like Alpha Stream, Teo Sabadia.
Keith Baker has a bunch of cool stuff on his. But there are so many people who put out really great content. But I think Matt's. If you just start from the beginning of Matt's stuff and go through it, it's all of the information you need.
So the other part of this, besides collecting information, is I want to put together a starter DM kit for her. And so I had to sit down this week and think about what goes into a starter DM kit, right? And here's what I came up with. You need a notepad. You need a pen or a pencil.
Yep.
You need dice.
Yep.
Is any of this stuff actually on the screen? I guess it is.
Yeah.
Look at that. And then the one piece of specific gear that I decided to actually buy was I bought the DM's screen, right? And for me, I thought that was important because it has all of the finicky rules that everybody forgets. Why not? If you're a beginner, you want to know, what does invisible mean? What does paralyzed mean? What does petrified mean? Etc. And then, it has some other handy charts about lighting and travel pace and cover and how much it costs to buy a mug of ale and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, rather than spending a bunch of money on a book or whatever, if I want to get them started, they can get the basic rules PDF, they can get a DM screen and some paper and some dice, and they're ready to, they can start going.
Yep.
I would also obviously recommend, we talked about it, not in depth today, but we referred to it a bunch, the starter set, if you want to give them an adventure to start with.
It's great, and it's a slow build, so you learn how to do very, very simple combat first, and then it gets much more complex as you go along. They introduce things
And I think
slowly.
you're not, also keep in mind, you're not obligated to play through the whole thing if you don't want to.
Adventure Zone didn't. They did
Right.
4 episodes, and then we're out.
Now, if you wanted to get a little bit more advanced, I would argue the next thing you should get is a player's handbook, not necessarily a Dungeon Master's Guide. I think a player's handbook is a great place to
These
start.
are the rules you need more than the ones that are in the DM's guide.
But that's it. I thought about things that I don't think you need for your first time DMing. I don't think you need a battle mat, and I don't think you need miniatures.
Nope. Theater of the mind is
And
how a lot of people prefer to play.
one of the reasons I say that is it's easier to speed up combat when you're playing Theater of the Mind. When you're on the battle mat and you start counting squares, it starts to turn into a little bit of a game of arithmetic of like, no, actually that's 36, 35 feet away, and now you have to do a double move, you can't do an attack, and it gets really bogged down in the minutia. Some people, are kinesthetic, and that's the way that they have to do it. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. You certainly see a lot of that. And I enjoy playing that way for certain occasions. But if you're just starting out, it's easier to say, oh yeah, on the other side of the wagon, there's a couple orcs and they're shooting crossbows at you. Okay, I charge over to them and I hit them with my sword. Can I do that? Now you get to make a judgment call of, they're a little bit further away because they're using ranged weapons. Do you want to use a double move to close that distance, or you can just to get into the fight, you can go, yeah, you can rush right over there and attack. Well, you get to you have control over it, and it's a little fuzzy, which enables you to shortcut, kind of like get quicker to whatever action you're kind of getting toward. So I literally like had the battle mat like in the shopping cart, and I was like, I'm gonna delete this.
I don't think you need it. And if push comes to shove, you can use pennies on a table just laid out if you have a bunch of different things happening, or if you have a lot of creatures or a lot of players, and just to know rough positioning. You don't need to know, okay, this is 35 feet, and then I take a 5-foot step, and that's not essential when you're a new player. I have only recently transitioned to using a computer as a DM. I have a OneNote, which allows me to cross-reference anything and everything and to log my campaign. That is something I will strongly encourage everyone to do, is make notes about what happened in each session.
Yes.
And especially if your players do something wacky and off script. That's when, you decided to change the barmaid's name. Okay, we're going to keep that and know that. So in the future, somebody's going to come up to you and ask by the old name, and now you're going to have the real.
I think, try to take as many notes as you can without slowing down the pace of the game, and definitely jot some notes after the game if you can, of things that you had to make up, which you will have to make things up. It's also okay to offload some of that and have the players give a recap of what they thought happened, because oftentimes the notes that you make didn't necessarily make the same impression that it made on the group. So the players may remember that guy's name differently. They may remember him as like, oh, he was really sketchy and suspicious. And you're like, what do you mean?
He wasn't.
He healed you. What are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, why did he do that? That seems really sketchy and suspicious.
Yeah. So you make a note, and then now they've told you what they want the game to be.
Right.
And recaps, you can also reward whoever does the recap. You can reward that with XP, especially if you have somebody who's or inspiration, especially if you have one player who's really logging stuff, because that clearly is part of their fun for the game, is having that chronicle. Right.
You might reward them by letting them create some details that okay, you're planning. You may meet a merchant sometime soon. Why don't you tell me like what sort of thing they're selling, and tell me something about them, and give me a reason that your character knows them, and that way, that's a reward that doesn't involve them getting that player character getting ahead in the experience curve, or a lot of accounting or anything like that, right?
Yeah, but absolutely, I think really the only things you need are dice, piece of paper, the SRD
maybe a DM,
rules.
maybe a DM screen.
Maybe a DM screen, though plenty of DMs play without them.
Right. I just like it because it has all of the rules on it that everybody gets confused or upset by, or they forget.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about stuff that you might consider that you don't necessarily need is miniatures but no battle mat, right? Like at your session 0, you might go, okay, here's a group of 10 minis, and everybody find your character out of this group, right? Because for me, when I look at a miniature, I start creating the whole story of who that person is. Now, I don't ever actually have to physically put that character onto a battle mat to appreciate, like, oh, this is my little
This is my
token.
dude.
This is my guy, and this is the embodiment of everything that's on this character sheet. And that miniature becomes meaningful even if it's not playing a mechanical role in what's going on at the table. So you might consider getting a box of like
minis.
10 mini character minis
Or
whatever.
showing your players where they can choose their own minis, taking them to the local game store.
Yeah.
Showing them, I mean, if you really want to get fancy, show them Hero Forge, and then they lose their minds.
Beginner tips.
Hero
Forge, they're like $30 a piece. That's
Yeah,
definitely an
they're
advance.
awesome.
That's an advance. I agree, they're awesome.
I don't know, if it's your first character, you want to immortalize that thing.
But see, for me, I get more inspiration out of looking at something and looking at everything that's already sculpted on that guy than going through we actually had a thing where we wanted to make Hero Forge for the characters in our Iron Keep game, and Amy's playing a giant, right? Well, they don't really have a giant, and then we found a way to make it work, but he's playing a guy who wears a badger skin over his head, right? Well, they don't quite have a badger head. Yeah, they have a wolf skin, or they have a hawk head, or whatever it is. I don't know. That's just.
It can go back and forth. My players got Hero Forges.
I'm definitely a fan. I think if you're trying to inspire your players to create their characters, some people work that way. They work from the paper out, and some people like they're visually inspired by look at this guy, and even if it's not painted, they go wild.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool stuff.
So we have, we don't have a hard out, but we've gone almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a few questions? I know that Dom has collected a few. Hey, what's great is I don't have the thing that tells me. Let me look at it over here. Luigi, look at it. We have.
Or you can just take back there.
No. This is really complicated, Dom. How did I do it upside down? I did it backwards. Look at this. Oh!
There we go.
Magic.
Victory!
Stream communication opening. Doo-doo, boop, boop, boop. Rebooting. Doo-doo, boop, 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 boop. Amazon update loading. If you're excited about D&D, because we've been talking about it, you can catch my show Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific. That's the Iron Keep Chronicles. Where are you DMing while I'm waiting for this to load?
I am not currently DMing a ton on stream, but I have been doing a lot of charity events. I will be at San Diego Comic-Con talking about D&D. I've got 2 panels about RPGs and D&D happening there Thursday and Saturday. I'm always around on Twitter too. That's the main place I talk to people about D&D.
What is your Twitter handle?
It's at DreamWisp, DreamWisp. And I also I'm on Twitch, and I do streams talking about DM theory on Twitch. I am DreamWisp Jen on Twitch, so I'm always happy to answer questions there too.
You can find us at Saving Throw Show. Come on. So Modern Chow has a question. We're gonna do about. We'll see how far we get here. I don't want to go super. I don't want to take too much of Jen's time this afternoon.
Oh, good.
Modern Chow asks, when is it a good time to sort of take the reins a bit from a player? Example, instead of making a PC roll to discover an answer, you instead give them the answer or decide that a PC does or says something that you as the GM dictates. Is it a style thing?
I don't like DMs who play their players' characters. Unless you're dealing with a situation where someone is charmed, or someone is possibly a doppelganger, or somebody is, and then when that's happening, have the player in on it. Be passing notes to your player and say, hey, we're gonna do this thing. Here's what I need you to do. Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of times that I would say you can take control, but most of the time I let the players play, and if there's information they need to get, they'll get it from some source that is not from within their own group. Or if they know something and they look at me and say, hey, do I know this thing? I might say, hey, by the way, you do know this thing because you lived amongst the Dragonborn.
Right.
So you would actually know how this works.
Right.
That's sort of where I take the reins, but for the most part, I like the players to play their characters, and I play everybody else.
And I find like I'm a little bit fuzzy in that area in terms of the area for me where there's a hard bright line is you don't get to play the player's characters or assume an action on their part that makes them look stupid or incompetent
Yep.
or gets the party into unexpected trouble, right? That's where you're being a dick and not being a DM, is saying, oh, well, you know, whatever it is, if you take the narration away from them. I think it's okay, you know, in the realm of, let me give you an alternative way to find out this thing, or let's find an alternative course of action because what you're proposing doesn't really jive with the situation here. To narrate something for them, kind of like you said, that assumes their competence and or makes them look cooler or in character in a way that doesn't take away or endanger the rest of the party, right?
Yeah.
So it might be a thing of, you know, not even, like if we take the example of you find the dwarven runes carved on the stone door, I might narrate for them, you walk up and you begin tracing your fingers over the runes, right? Now, normally that's like, whoa, red alert, like you're taking over from my character. Why would my character touch those things? Well, there needs to be some level of trust that I'm going to get to a moment that is cool for your character. And if you make sure that your players know, I'm not going to narrate something for your character that's going to hurt them.
Yeah, they need to trust you.
You know, then it's okay to do that and go, you trace your fingers over and little wisps of flame flare up as you try and sense any sort of magic that might be stored. And in fact, you notice that the flame flares up around these particular runes or whatever. Do you need to go?
I just realized my car might.
You're probably okay,
Okay.
but if you want to go look quick.
If you want to check it, you're fine, or I can go run out and check.
Do you mind? I'm it's a black Accord right up front.
Okay, I'll go check.
Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just realized that.
You're
I was like,
probably fine.
ooh.
They're pretty good about that.
Sorry, guys.
But yeah, well, it is 2 hour
Just
parking
realized
up front.
it's been more than 2 hours.
You've been here longer than we've been talking. So strange. So I think that's one that's for me. That's the firm bright line. Like, I will, again, because I'm a fan of my own ideas, I will take narrative control away from characters in order to build a cool moment.
Yeah, you can do a cutscene
Like
once
real
in a while,
short, right?
But within reason.
Mm-hmm. Right, but you have to let your, you know, there's a famous adage that, like, be a fan of the players, right? You have to let your players know that you're a fan of their characters, and you're not going to do something that makes them that would be stupid, or makes them incompetent, or intentionally gets them in danger without their permission to, like, without some sort of permission to, like, let that moment of danger happen.
Thank you.
So that's where I fall on narrating characters. I also think it is okay, like you said, to occasionally have montages for stuff like overnight watch, or like especially a long series of travel. I hate overland travel sequences because it generally turns into random encounter, roll. It gets super boring. And the random encounter experience is completely opaque to everybody else at the table. They don't know what you're rolling or what the odds are of something bad happening.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of, like, okay, over the course of the next 7 days, it largely passes uneventfully. It's also an opportunity to, instead of taking control of their characters, to give them some control over the narration.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of my DMs actually had us do travel games on the thing. He had each of us come in with either a mini challenge or a game that we play as we travel, and it was a great dynamic to bring everyone in and also have the characters sort of be playful. One of the characters brought a bunch of potions and was like, hey, drink these, and she had the table of what they did, and all sorts of stuff happened.
Right.
Those kinds of things are great ways to engage your players during overland travel. Find ways that you know, it's the long car trip.
Right.
What do you do?
I think it's okay too to say, all right, you arrive 7 days later, but name what are 2 things you discovered about yourself, or about or 2 unusual things that you noticed about someone else, about yourself, or about the countryside as you were passing through, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you can let them world build a little bit, and then you take it out of their hands, and they start getting invested, and you take notes, and that gives you fodder for something that you can reincorporate later, right? All right, so hopefully that gives you more of a feel for when is it okay to take it. It's like, for me, it's definitely like as long as you don't make them look stupid. And then sometimes it's okay when. I think it's important to realize that you don't have to play through every single moment of a character's life.
It's
right.
true.
It's an easy trap to fall into. Is now you're making camp. Now we're gonna roll for our watches. Now you wake up. What do you do in the morning?
You want the highlights reel.
Right,
You want
yeah.
the summary. You want to be able to do it in a 1 minute montage.
If you have a big open-ended, like you have the summer to play and do whatever you want, great. Like you can play that what I call kind of like an ants marching kind of style. And then they went to the edge of the picnic table. Then they crawled up the leg. Then they, whatever it is. So, all right. Will GM for Food says, starting off, meet in a tavern, quote unquote, versus you have been traveling with each other for a month. And along those lines, Deba says, do you have a fun alternative to meeting in a tavern?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a fan, especially for newer GMs, of you've been traveling together for a while. Build in those relationships. Look at fiasco relationships if you want some great ways to start that conversation. But the better the ties are to the group, the less likely you are to have people going, why am I even with these people?
Right.
You want to have a reason that they're part of the group and a reason that they're involved and a reason that they want the group to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm a big fan of, instead of, in addition to having a session 0 where you talk about what's going to happen, having a session kind of like 0.5 where we play a different game altogether. We don't play Dungeons and Dragons. We use the characters that they're going to play, but we don't use any of the statistics.
Yep.
And then we set it in a completely different era, right?
That's a
so
super
so
cool
my
idea.
favorite thing is to make them teenagers who live in the same village or go to the same school or whatever it is, and then have them play through a more of a story-based game and play an adventure using that game. So I will use Wildlings by John Harper. You could certainly play Fiasco. I've adapted Tales from the Loop to be a medieval fantasy type of thing. But what that allows me to do is, number one, you get to establish, like, they get to discover what the characters are
know
about.
each other.
And also know their character because they've never played it before. So they get to, like, to explore the idea that they had, but then also how it bounces off the other characters.
Yeah.
But then you have a time jump that's like, okay, our first session is 10 years later. You're not 14, you're 24.
Right.
You're going out into the world to adventure for the first time. And what that time jump allows you to do is, if you didn't like something that happened earlier in the thing, it's 10 years later, you forgot about it. It doesn't matter. It's okay, whatever, right? The flip side of that is, if two characters really have a rivalry and one of them stabbed the other while they're off in the woods, kind of like chasing away, getting run down by the giant from the mountain, that might still be in play. They might still harbor some sort of resentment towards each other.
Yeah.
But it's created in a way that's organic and that both parties understand, rather than, oh, my character doesn't like you.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean anything.
There's got to be a reason for it, and it lets them build that out.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say another alternative that I really like as a starting point is you're in a prison cell,
Right.
Because it throws them right into being in the world, being affected by the world, and now there's gonna be you got to break out. You got to get out. You got to convince someone to let you out. It gives them an immediate objective of how to step out.
That would also make, again, like a great prequel kind of session where you were all imprisoned together.
What did you get
And
busted
you had
for?
what did you get busted for? You all find, you play through the kind of the jailbreak or your time's up or whatever it is, and then you start your actual game with, boom, here we are. 5 years later, we all encounter each other again or whatever it is, right? And the thing is, at that point, you can go, oh, well, who walks into the tavern? But, Korod the Red. Oh, I haven't seen you since we had to, we're breaking rocks up on the Stone Creek Mountains or whatever it is. Then you can start it in a tavern because they all know each other and they have pre-existing relationships and those things are established and you don't have to contrive something. That's really the issue with you're all in a tavern is it's a little too convenient
You
and
don't
it's
have
a
a
little too
reason
contrived.
for you all to be together and work together.
Right. But if your relationships are all established and you know who each other is, then randomly meeting in a tavern is a great moment of circumstance where you get to kind of confront each other.
You're having drinks with your buddies, and
Yeah.
you're at so-and-so's bachelor party, and...
The other thing that I would encourage you to do is think about using Dungeon World's bonds system to establish some relationships, because that system is really designed to fabricate backstory and relationships between members of the party in a very interesting way. And it's a very simple, straightforward thing to literally just pluck out of Dungeon World and slam into your D&D game.
Yeah.
All right. I think Gimme an Axe is a little bit unsure of what you're describing earlier in your game. He says, can you reiterate using the invisible ink on minis? I think you're using them on props,
I actually
right?
use that on paper. So my characters found a note, and I've been working with, I love puzzles and code breaking, so I brought a cipher that I like into that. I've written messages in invisible ink that you can get off of, you can get UV pens at Cost Plus or off of Amazon, just cheap, like $3 or less. And I actually write in the cipher, and then one of the pieces they have helps them break the cipher so they can then start decoding. But so every handout that I've given them, every letter they've found, every some of their item cards, because I use item cards in my game, have stuff. But anything that's been planes touched has this writing on it and will help clue them to where they're going. So I did it for months. They had no idea what was happening. And when I started, I didn't know where I was going. So I literally just put pieces of the cipher on things because I went, this gives me time. I can figure it out, and once they have the cipher, then I can use it wherever I want to tell whatever story I want.
Dom likes to joke that I'm a level 3 DM, and I can only aspire to one day rising above my station and getting promoted to a level 4 DM. I feel like you're already there. I am not that ambitious.
It's just an easy trick, and when it gets revealed finally, they feel so cool. But it's a simple thing to do.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Nullzone42 asks, D&D, by nature of its rule set, has a fair number of binary pass-fail kind of situations, and the fail cases can often be nothing happens. How do you mitigate this and move the narrative forward without rendering the check moot in the first place by just giving them the same information they'd have gained on a success, right?
I roll a lot when they're not thinking I'm rolling for things, and I roll when I'm not actually rolling for things. I will just roll the dice to keep my players on their toes, so they are never sure when I'm actually doing a check or not.
Well, so I think the question, though, is if you say, okay, you're examining this this ancient statue, give me a history check, and then they botch the roll.
What happens?
Yeah,
if they
how
don't find the
how do you
thing
turn that
they need?
into something that's either not, well, we learned what we would have learned anyhow, or nothing happens.
I mean, sometimes I think they don't get anything out of it. I think if you're in a room and you flub your perception check and you can't find the hidden door, I'm not going to give you the hidden door.
Mm-hmm.
But if you come at it in a creative way and can find a thing. The other thing is I think so often players will say, oh, I saw that they rolled for this thing. Now I'm going to roll for this thing.
Oh, well, that's one of my pet peeves.
So I limit that pretty significantly. So if somebody falls through, there's no reason anyone else would distrust them. However, if, for example, you have a character who is supposed to be a rogue and is supposed to be looking for traps but is not particularly perceptive and keeps flubbing the roll, it becomes a thing of they don't trust the rolls when they're actually working.
Right.
And so they start, it builds in interesting character dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a character who's completely flubbing rolls, I don't think you have to give them everything. Part of D&D is you build a bunch of stuff that you don't use.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you describe something else they find. Or maybe it's what they think they found. You know, you roll a 1, you have no idea what you're actually looking at, but you think it could be a this.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think there's a couple of different angles to attack this whole thing at. For starters, the whole like everybody roll thing that drives me just bonkers. I think it's helpful to only call for rolls in response to an action. Okay? So it's not good enough to say, oh, I searched the room, because that's not concrete and meaningful.
Yeah.
I think it's more helpful to ask them, okay, what does that mean? What are you doing? Okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to move all of the furniture and look underneath all the furniture. Okay, give me a search check. And then if somebody else goes, well, can I make a roll? What are you doing?
Yeah.
All right, fine. If you're also going to help move the furniture, why not make it, or if you're going to do something different, that's an additional piece of information that helps build the scene and build context. Fine, I'm okay. But if three people go, oh, well, I'm searching the room, I'm going to search too, I'm going to search too,
Yeah.
then they're just juicing the odds of trying to find something
Yep.
good. I will often call for just a blank series of rolls, just because I know that there's a piece of information and I'm trying to identify who's going to find it. Right? So it's not necessarily so much of the players putting in effort to something that they're not going to get, but it's more me identifying who is going to find this out. So that's one thing, is like calling for rolls as a result of an action. What specific thing are you doing that's either helping or different from what this person is doing? And especially if they're like, well, can I make an Arcana check too? If you're not trained in Arcana, okay, you can make it a disadvantage, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
The second piece of it, when they quote unquote flub a roll and you can't give them information that's on the spot, is obviously, depending upon by how much they failed it, you can give them some partial information, right?
Absolutely.
Like I said, with the dwarven stone kind of thing, if they make the Arcana check, they know that these are runes that are put in a specific pattern to summon a flame strike on anyone who pushes on the stone. Okay, that might be the success condition. Well, the failure condition might be, this has something to do with magical fire.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's enough
Bits and
information for them to still act on without giving away carte blanche what
Yeah,
the information is.
tiers of success.
Right. And then finally, on the completely flubbed roll, where they go, oh, I rolled a 1 and I have no ranks, it's a natural one, whatever it is, I will tend to narrate what their character was doing. That's a character trademark move of theirs, instead of whatever they were looking for. Oh, okay. Well, you start looking at this thing and you remember, you realize these are dwarven runes, and you remember one time that you stayed at this dwarven hostel and they served this really good, they said it was jaganga. You found out later it was stench cow, but that jaganga was delicious. And your mouth, you start salivating, you start thinking about all the different things that they served there, and what a nice time it was. Wait a minute, what wall?
Yeah.
And that at least paints the picture of the situation. Somebody on Twitter, I think it was Mike Shea or somebody like that, Sly Flourish, said, we're really doing like a radio play where we're the words and descriptions that we provide give context and inform the action of the scene.
Absolutely.
And so rather than saying nothing happens, no, that's where I will take the narrative reins away from that character and go, no, you're thinking about this time that you stayed at this dwarven hostel and got served this amazing food, and you're kind of, you look over and you see that they're drooling a little bit for no particular reason. They just seem spaced out. I will occasionally, just to get back on the narration thing, I will occasionally check in with the player and go, does that make sense for you? Does that sound like something your character would do? And if you give them something that's in character, that seems like part of something their character would do, that adds to the world and the information a little bit of at least who they are, not necessarily what's going on in the situation. 98% of the time, they're like, yeah, he probably is thinking about food.
I totally would do that,
yeah. You can even get them to role play a little bit that way. All right, that's that. There, we've solved that problem, Jennifer. Give me an axe comes back with another question. Is it okay for DMs to fudge dice rolls, or is it cheating?
Absolutely okay. Your job is to facilitate the story and to help steer the table, and if you want something to go away and it will make a much more interesting game, Absolutely. Or if your players are getting just destroyed by something and you're like, this is not the fight that they should go down on. Absolutely fudge rolls. Completely. I am a fan of roll fudging whenever it makes sense in terms of story. Don't use it as a weapon. It's not your as a DM you have the prerogative to fudge rolls. That does not mean you get to use it to lie to your players.
Right.
It's the difference between like, oh no, he swung too wide. Oops. And saying, oh, he critted on you. Like, oh, nat 20.
I am going to qualify my answer in a different way, right? Which is when I started playtesting 5th edition, I decided to stop using a DM screen and start doing all of my rolls in the open because I wanted to test the system in an objective way as possible, even though it's not really possible, right? So when you do that, you generally can't fudge hits, misses, crits, fumbles, fails, saving throws, all that sort of stuff, right? You just generally can't. So I don't. But the things that you can fudge in the service of creating an interesting story, an interesting experience, etc., like heightening the drama or relieving the drama or whatever it is, you can control how many hit points it has, how optimized its tactics might be. Maybe it gets confused or agitated,
who it's gonna attack.
or changes its tactics or whether. But like hit points especially are something that I have no problem changing, how either making them tougher, but generally I cut hit points by a third.
Yeah.
I've got a level 3 party, and they face many monsters that are supposed to have 40 hit points that I give 15 hit points or 20 hit points to. It makes combat go a lot faster. The monsters are largely just as dramatic, and it keeps things from being a grind, right? So I tend to fudge around the stats that are invisible, not my die rolls. By the same token, if I call for a check or whatever, I don't necessarily have the DC in mind. If everybody rolls a 4, then I'm kind of stuck in a pickle. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's see if I can think of a way. But you don't have to cheat as much when you can come up with partial mixed successes or an actionable result, even on a catastrophic fail, or not a catastrophic fail, but on a really bad botch. In a catastrophic fail, everybody at the table. And I feel like I've been negligent in not saying this during the course of this talk here, but if you're a beginner DM, there are 2 opportunities that you have to completely break the game, to literally throw the rules out the window and go, ha ha ha, okay, this happens. And those moments are when a player rolls a natural 20 and when a player rolls a natural 1. Now you have to be careful with natural 1s because that can be very punishing. So you want to, if you decide to inflict critical fumbles, then you have to be careful about how brutal that they get. And what the
Mine are
expectations
usually you trip, you drop your weapon,
Fall
you
down
fall
or whatever
prone.
it is, right?
Something that's a small penalty. Occasionally you'll miss an hidden ally, but that's ranged weapons in weird quarters. But generally crit ones. I want my players to feel like heroes.
Yes.
I don't want them to feel like weaklings.
Yes.
And so basically everything I do is in service of getting them to their heroic story in the long run.
But there's no better feeling for anyone at the table than rolling a natural 20. Even though you have a 5% chance of doing it any given time you pick up that die, rolling that natural 20 is a moment of drama where you literally go into the matrix and go into bullet time and everything slows down and focuses on that one thing that happens. And feel confident in the fact that you can just blow the rules out the window. And if you decide that critical hit is going to gut that monster and there's a giant spray of blood and it gasps a couple times and dies, fine. So pay attention to those moments because those are times in the game mechanics where because of the drama of what's happening in the story and because of the way that that intersects with random chance, you have the opportunity to completely go off script and go, okay, you jump up to the 3rd story window and you clamber up the clothesline that's hanging off from the 5th story window and you swing across the alleyway and do a double backflip
Yep.
and you land on the parapet and have your sword drawn ready to
Make them feel
strike
like
the guard.
heroes. Make your players feel like heroes.
Yes. So I think it's okay to cheat invisibly, which essentially is agreeing with her, except that she makes her rolls
I make mine
invisibly behind the
behind the screen.
screen, and I find other ways around the mechanics that don't involve fudging my dice rolls.
And I don't fudge rolls all that often, but if it's something that really seems like it matters to the story, or if it's going to keep tragedy from befalling my players in a game where they're not okay with that, then I'm gonna steer a little bit. I mean, my job is to steer, and sometimes I have to steer a little more forcefully than others.
Will GM for Food says, aha, so you take control of a character when they get a nat 20. I get it, yes. I mean,
No,
it's
I
a fair...
actually, my players usually can narrate that, but the thing
Right.
I let my players narrate the most of is killing blows.
Right,
I like
right.
letting my players narrate that because they feel so awesome.
It's a flip back and forth because some players will be uncomfortable, like they'll feel like they're put on the spot, like, oh, I have to think of something cool, and they might not enjoy that. They might just feel like they're being set up to kind of like that they're not gonna be good enough to say what it is. So it is definitely an opportunity to let them narrate. Okay, the classic, Mercer move of like, how do you want to do this?
Mm-hmm.
But it is also an opportunity for you as the GM. I always like to take whatever they say and then add a little
Expound
twist to
on
it.
it,
Like
yeah.
make it like either make it try and make it a little bit cooler. Like it's okay, we can make you do a double backflip across the alley. So to give them a little bit of leeway in the narrative, or I like to do something that will either set somebody else up at the table as a result, or it somehow blends like a little more organically into the given circumstances. Because sometimes you'll say
what the monsters are doing, and you see an opening and you go for it, and he lifts up with his axe and you see that there's a chink in his armor right there, and you can just get in there with your dagger, whatever you're doing.
Well, or you give them narrative control and they start fabricating a bunch of stuff, and you have to go, okay, it doesn't quite play out like that, but here's the way that it plays out. All right, Welsh Andy T has a tough one. As DMs, how would we handle a person or people who want to split off from the group?
If it's a short excursion, it can happen. If it's going to be a more than 10 minutes of the game, 15 minutes of the game, I generally steer them towards it. But that's something I covered in my session 0 is not... I mean, that's not true. There are occasionally times that it makes sense for the party to split and go off after different objectives, but it's got to be a camera shift from we're going to follow your story for a minute and now we're going to go over here and follow what you're doing, and making sure they have plenty of opportunities to come back together, because ultimately otherwise you're going to end up with 2 campaigns and you're going to need to split your night into 2 different...
I think it's difficult because it is something that you see a lot of. Like if you listen to the Adventure Zone, especially like the latest arc, they regularly like, okay, now we're doing a flashback for just your character, and everybody else just kind of fades off.
Single
into
character
the
episode,
or whatever it is. Or when they first started their Amnesty arc, it was the 3 characters weren't even together. It was like you're off in the woods and you're down at your store and you're doing a magic show. So there's some examples in the kind of the streaming and podcasting world that I think run counter to the conventional wisdom of D&D.
But streams are not tabletop.
Yes, exactly.
They're different things. It is a stream. It is an entertainment version of the game.
And they're more advanced players, right? Like he knows that because he's an accomplished enough DM that he can pull it off and know that he's going to pull them all together for one thing. But secondly, like you say, it's an entertainment thing where he knows there's still suspense and drama being created.
Well, and they can
he
go-
doesn't care
And
that
they
these
can
people
go
are
record
bored.
the one character's episode without the other people sitting there
Right.
watching.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you're not taking the time away from the game to give one
Yeah.
person attention. If you have a player who regularly goes off on their own, you've got to find a reason to get them to stick with the group.
Yeah. I think it's one of those unspoken kind of cultural rules that people need to be explicitly introduced to in D&D. Otherwise it pops up as a trap.
Yeah.
Everybody who's played D&D for more than 5 years knows don't split the
party.
But first-time players don't know that, and they think that it's like a movie or a
They
story
think
where
it's
they
a-
get to go off and have, well, I'll just go over here and check. That sounds interesting to me. I'm going to check that out.
If it's a brand new player, the way you teach that is you teach them a lesson right away, which is the mean way to do it. But once you've taught them why they should not be off on their own and why they need a group, they probably won't go do it again.
I'm more of a carrot kind of guy myself.
Yeah,
That's
I
me.
tend to be carrot too.
Who's the
but
real
that's one
dungeon
when
bastard
you-
here? That's the question.
No, sometimes you do need to teach your players.
I think
but
it's okay in a beginning game to like state some of these things outright. Like, you're a team, you should work together.
Yeah.
And explain, like, if you go off and do different things, then either understand that we're going to have a split focus as we go back and
Yeah.
forth, but I can't just exclusively halt the game for
Yeah.
your character, right? On the other hand, it is definitely an advanced DM technique to have a montage where you go back and forth between, okay, now we're back at the
So-and-so
dinner.
does this.
You're in the kitchen. Now we're at the dinner party out front. You're trying to sneak in and you've got your
Yeah.
costume. How does this work for you?
one of the best ways though to do that is to build your party off of relationships.
Yeah.
Because if you are there with your sibling and you're going on an adventure together, it's pretty unlikely you're going to abandon your sibling.
Right. Right.
If you are as a group hired to do this thing, it's unlikely that you're going to walk away from that paycheck, assuming it's whatever you want.
I think it's okay
There.
also to use a narrative tool like, okay, if you describe it almost as if it's a movie, okay, we go into a split screen and over here we have,
Yep.
So
and so goes.
the
and
rogue is in the back of
goes
the
and talks
kitchen.
to the people in the
Yeah.
town, while these guys go off and talk to the Lord, and
Yeah. And so you'll see that technique used a lot, especially on stream, where like, okay, now we cut back to, and as long as these people know that they're going to get their share
Yep.
of table time, then it can be okay. But I would say either state it up front explicitly, like, you're a group, you function best as a group,
Yep.
stick together as a group, and then see if they follow through. Like,
lay it out in a.
generally
I
kind
vote
of,
for laying it out in a session 0 and saying, hey, if you're gonna try and go lone wolf, that's not gonna fly.
yeah, and in terms of that, like people who continually do that, then I think you have to have an out of session discussion
Yep.
with that person saying, look, I understand the Wolverine character that you're playing here, but this is a team game, and you need to find a way for them to fit in with the team for whatever reason.
Even Wolverine would work with the X-Men when he
Right.
had to.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I'm at with if that it's kind of the chaotic neutral kind of question of they're only in it for themselves. You need to tie them into the rest of the group somehow, but also have a conversation that says, we need to make this fun for everybody. We can't just shine the spotlight on you. So how can we pull you into this whole thing, right? All right. DJ Regular says, this isn't a D&D specific question, but it's more about GMing new content. How do you handle playtesting? For instance, in the case of D&D, if you want to test out a homebrew thing on players or you're coming up with your own system, how do you introduce this stuff to your players? What do you need to have in mind or prepared once you get started? And then once it's done, what sort of questions for your players afterward are valuable? So how do you playtest, like, it sounds like essentially sort of like house rules. If you're going to come up with a house rule,
Yeah.
how do you introduce it to your players? How do you...
I think you
Assess?
you basically tell them it's experimental, that you're trying it out and may adjust how it works on the fly, and get feedback from them. Say, hey, what was fun about that? What didn't work? But I think if you're specifically playtesting something comprehensive, then it's worth getting a separate group together and saying, hey, this is going to be a group for playtesting. I want to try this out and see how it goes. So.
I think it's okay to tell them that you're going to introduce a house rule. I would be careful of telling them what the purpose of the rule is, because oftentimes you will get kind of armchair quarterbacking on how it's working before you even play with it,
Yeah.
right? And if you can have the kind of relationship with your players where you can negotiate that,
Yeah.
then great. But if you don't have that kind of relationship with your players, then that defeats the purpose of play testing it because they're already prejudging what it is and how it works.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, I've been thinking about a couple different situations. I just want to change the way I feel like these mechanics aren't working the way that I think works best for our game. So I'm going to change these things.
Yeah.
And then play with it for 2 or 3 sessions. Solicit their feedback. Do you like the way this works or does it bug you?
Yeah.
Would you rather go back to the old way or is there something else you would like? And then make a decision from there.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's tricky. At that point, maybe you can say, like, well, I was trying to address the fact that the bard has a lot of fire and forget, or, you know, save or suck spells where they cast it, and if everybody makes their save, they just lose a spell slot and nothing happens.
Yeah.
So that's what I was trying to do. Does this feel fair to everyone? I think that's really like the main question is it fair? Is it more fun than whatever it's fixing or replacing? I think those are the 2 main questions. But be careful about here's why I want to test this. So, all right. Our last question of our marathon 2.5 hour stream. I told Jen earlier when we were setting this up, I was like, I like to do an hour, maybe hour and a half. It's a big topic, so
It is. There's a lot in it.
I appreciate your expertise and indulgence.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me.
Thorfiner asks, what would be your number 1 tip to ensure player buy-in on a storyline?
Listen to your players. They're going to tell you what they want. They're going to buy in when you integrate their backstory, when you give them the kind of combat they are looking for, when you give them the kind of roleplay experience they're looking for. If you listen to them and you hear them and you adjust accordingly, they're going to be on board 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think you have to know kind of what their play style is and then give them nuggets that are already kind of like integrated with the adventure for them to chew on, even if it's not heavily like 15 sessions down the road integrated.
Yeah.
Like give them something that connects them into, you know, okay, in the first town that you encounter, they've undergone an attack by orcs. Well, give them someone in the town that they know that they care about. Give them a reason for traveling to that town. Like give them little sub goals that will attach to their character's backstory or motivation. Another trick that I have used is I have said things like, okay, this adventure takes place during a war. There's this enormous war going on in the woods, and it's elves versus orcs, and even worse and nastier. At the end of the war, 10 years from now, assuming your character survives, what is their life like on the other side? Now again, I use this 10-year time span because there's a lot of stuff that can change. It's very fungible. You make it explicit, like this isn't for sure what's gonna, oh well, I have the Hand of Vecna, and I also have 3 other artifacts and plate mail of etherealness. Like don't not that specific, but it could be something like,
but I've resigned myself to never fighting again. What does it do to you as a...
I will even get more explicit. Like, I'm willing to say, like, oh, okay, do you have a signature weapon? Yes. Okay, we don't have to necessarily pin down what that is.
Yeah.
Or what's your job? But more to your point, what's changed in you? Okay, you are the instructor at the Thieves' School for the Military Academy of the Kingdom. Yep. Do you still like being a thief? Do you still have...
Are you happy to be teaching
and bringing them in? Do you do side gigs? Like, do you have, like, is this your legit job and then you pull
your hobby or is
stunts
this
in the back.
your-
But that sort of thing gets them thinking about where their character wants to go. And if you take notes on something that went well for them, something that went bad for them, something they learned, that sort of stuff, take notes on that. Then you can sprinkle opportunities for those things or something similar to those things to happen during the course of the adventure.
And they will tell you what they want.
Yeah.
They'll tell you outright. They will say, I want to do this. I want to feel this way. And just if you pick up on it and go with it, it's all going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, and they will absolutely buy in. Also, snacks.
Yeah, keep your players fed well enough that they don't fall asleep at the table. I'm 50-50 on it. The deeper I get into my career, the more I'm like, I can't drink sugared soda. It will take me right out of the game. So, but yes.
And I like having caffeine when I DM.
I think
need it.
well, caffeine, yes. Caffeine and sugar is too much.
Caffeine, sugar, too much. Fair enough.
Yeah. I think the bottom line of this whole thing is, again, you're a host and you're setting up the party, and then everybody brings something to the party and you all create a great story together.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. And if you can get an idea of what trips their little, like what they think is fun. Oh, this is the fun lever for them. Sometimes it's combat. Sometimes it's storytelling, it's role-playing, whatever. Find those things and then kind of like just play with tone and the pacing and the variety of experiences, and you'll have a great. When you see the opportunity for something cool, that cool thing happens.
Yep.
Take the shortcut.
Absolutely.
Don't make them fight for it.
No.
I'm not saying hand out rewards.
But let cool stuff
But
happen.
let's cut to the cool thing that happens next. I think it came up in chat earlier, but a great thing to keep in mind when you're DMing is what's the next coolest thing that could happen that would be plausible? What's the next coolest thing that could happen? And as long as you start turning those outcomes over and over in your head, you'll be well on your way to becoming a great DM.
Yeah.
Whether you're a level 1 DM like myself or a level 4 DM.
I think you got
like
plenty
Jen.
in there to be.
It's official. I'm level 3. I've been at level 3 for a couple of years now. We'll see whether I progress or not. So I hope you have had an entertaining and informative 2.5 hours here.
Thanks for sticking around.
Thanks for sticking around or watching this on the YouTubes or wherever you may be finding us across time, space, and the internet. So, like I said earlier, if you want to watch my show that I run, you can catch me Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. on Saving Throw. You can search our archives on twitch.tv/Saving Throw Show for the Iron Keep Chronicles. That's my show. If you want more DM advice, there's more of this show called Disorganized Play. Not every episode is a standalone extravaganza of wisdom. But I definitely try to pursue different topics and explore my own personal GMing philosophy on that show. So that's where I'm at. Jen, once again, where can people find you if they want to follow what you produce, make, or get more insight as to what's going on in your world?
So Twitter is usually the best spot to find me. It's at DreamWisp, DreamWisp. You can always reach out to me there and ask questions about DMing. I also do DM advice on Twitch, DreamWisp Jen, and I do a fair number of streams and charity shows and things like that. So you can find me. I always post about when those are happening. I probably won't have any more until after Comic-Con though, because we did 6 in the last month.
Boom, boom, boom. Very good. Coming up later this week on Saving Throw Show, tomorrow night at 8 p.m. we have Wildcards. So tune in for another episode of our Weird Wild West show with, what did we decide? He's Glendale's GM. I don't remember what honorific we have bestowed upon DJ Jordan Callerman, but tune in for all of the madness tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And then Sunday at 1 p.m. we'll have an installment of Dungeon in a Box. I assume that is hosted by the creator of Dungeon in a Box, Mr. David Kretchmer, America's GM. David Crennan, yeah. No, we don't know how he earned that title, but he certainly does work for it. So we're self-proclaimed America's GM, David Crennan. So that's Sunday at 1. And on Sunday at 5. Sunday at 5, we're having a Savage Harry Potter. Tune in for a Savage Worlds game set in the milieu, the campaign, the wonderful world of Harry Potter. So that's what's coming up this holiday, or the remainder of this holiday weekend here. So tune in and enjoy. You can always catch us on the VOD or on the YouTubes. Please tell your friends and neighbors about our show. If you've got something out of this, tell us about the channel. We're always looking to grow our viewership. It is the beginning of the month. It's an ideal time to subscribe to our Patreon if you are so inclined, or just sub up. If you sub up or receive a gift sub or use your Twitch Prime sub that you got from Amazon or whatever, you get a free reroll that you can assign to one of our players at the table in any of our games. And there's another variety of other benefits as well. I want to thank our mods, Farquad and the rest of the crew for keeping our channel safe, friendly, clean, and accessible for all the new faces that have popped up here in the chat today. And this is always a surprise, so I'm going to tell you about it now. But at the end of the show, we point at the camera and we say, "Let's dungeon." So thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of the weekend if you're not going to be joining us here on the cameras. Thanks for your continued support, your many fine questions. And until next time, let's dungeon!